To anyone who may not know me, one thing that I've been passionate about for my entire life is music. I love music for a multitude of reasons. Gorgeous instrumentation, emotional songwriting, and its indescribable ability to change one's life and their perception of the world around them, just to name a few. Not only that, but there are seemingly endless amounts of new artists, albums, and songs to discover that all bring their own distinctive qualities to the table. Though some of these qualities are certainly different from others. There's energetic music, melancholic music, emotional and even philosophical music, and then there's disturbing music. The music that burdens you, that makes you squirm, that unapologetically makes you realize just how fucked up our world truly is. It's this style of song that has simultaneously horrified and fascinated me. And out of pure intrigue, I've spent countless hours scouring the depths of the internet to find the most horrifying and dismaying songs ever made. Not only in sound, but in gut-wrenching lyrics, overwhelming artist performances, and devastating background. This is an iceberg of the most disturbing songs ever made, going from some of the most acclaimed tracks written all the way down to the most obscure yet equally terrifying pieces of music. With all of that being said, let's dive right in. We all know it, we all dread it. Pumped Up Kicks has undoubtedly aged to be one of the most popular, disturbing songs ever written. And a large reason for its popularity has to do with the dreadful feeling that many oblivious listeners have universally experienced when learning of the song's unsettling meaning. Pumped Up Kicks is a track that takes a deep dive into the troubled psyche of a boy named Robert, vividly detailing his stressful upbringing while highlighting his desire to fatally shoot his peers with a gun, as shown through the track's iconic chorus. In the song, it is evident that Robert comes from a low-income family and has been exposed to a multitude of harmful elements throughout his life, including firearms possessed by his father, as well as physical abuse at the hands of said father. Robert begins to grow frustrated with his grim life, and resorts to taking out all his anger and anguish on the rest of his happier, upper-class peers in his community. We know that Robert is secretly envious of his peers' wealth from lines within the chorus. He pokes fun at their expensive shoes by referring to them as pumped up kicks, a reference to Reebok pumps, which were first released in 1989 for a price of $170. Reebok pumps have a special technology that helps formulate air cushioning and further tighten the shoe when worn, allowing for its users to move around much more comfortably than those with more average shoes. Robert has seen his peers' rich status on full display through the pricey shoes that they wear on the regular, and in a playful yet dark manner. He calls out to the popular kids and says that they should use their fancy athletic sneakers to save themselves for when he's chasing after them with a gun in his hand and an urge to kill. In a 2019 interview with Billboard, Mark Foster, the lead singer, had this to say about the eerie hit. I remember that week that I wrote the song, there was some shooting that happened, and it really bothered me because I recognized that it was going to continue to get worse, and that nothing was going to change. And then that song popped out. It wasn't necessarily reacting to the shooting itself, it was reacting to the idea, realizing that this isn't going to change, that this is going to get so bad. It was like peeling back time and looking into the future and being like, this is going to get so bad before anything changes, that a lot of people are going to die, and this is going to be a really dark period of American history. I think people filled in the blanks that it was about a school shooting, but I never say anything about a school in the song. It's really more about this person's psyche. Obviously the song is speaking about violent things, but it is a misconception that it's about a school shooting. Sonically speaking, the song is very much upbeat and catchy, which has led it to becoming Foster the People's most popular track by far and a standout hit. However, the true meaning of the song is anything but. In the words of Foster, it's a look inside the mind of an isolated, psychotic kid, one who has experienced torment and abuse all his life, and whose emotions have cultivated into the plotting of a mass shooting. Everyone who's ever heard this song remembers where they were when they were first enlightened of the track's darker theme, and given its massive success, the song has had an everlasting impact on its listeners, achieved through shedding a light on the motives of mass shooting perpetrators and where their horrific tendencies truly stem from. Featured as the fourth track of their 1988 album Injustice for All, Metallica's One is a grisly portrayal of the point of view of a World War I soldier named Joe Bonham, who's a character in the 1939 novel Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. The song tells the story of how Bonham suffered a direct blow from a landmine explosion while in battle, one so deadly that it caused the soldier to lose all his senses as well as his face, arms, and legs. Physically, the impact has left Bonham barely functional, having completely lost all his limbs and his ability to communicate with the outside world. But by some miracle, he managed to still survive the explosion and was later kept alive by the medical crew of a hospital. Though, from Bonham's perspective, his existence is the total opposite of a miracle. And this is shown through ghastly imagery and the roller coaster of emotions that is his instrumentation, as well as James Hetfield's moving vocal delivery. Through surreal songwriting, Hetfield is able to lyrically depict the indescribable pains Bonham is feeling in the aftermath of his near-death experience, detailing just how excruciating living is when your entire body has been lost from war, leaving you unable to see, unable to speak, and unable to scream. Despite Bonham having survived the landmine explosion, all he will ever feel for the remainder of his life is eternal suffering, and to him, this is a fate even worse than death. Listening attentively to the track's progression truly emphasizes on Bonham's agonizing existence and the numerous emotions he feels following his realization that he has survived. The song starts off with the sounds of a battlefield before being followed up with a quiet yet wistful guitar intro, setting the tone for the rest of the track as Bonham discovers the horrifying state he finds himself in. Gradually, Bonham foresees the harrowing life that lies ahead of him, and he is terrified of it. He realizes that he will spend the rest of his life in a hospital room, being tied to cold machines and fed through grotty tubes, all while he is physically imprisoned within his own body, as if he was stuck inside a womb, and is rendered unable to even express the anguish and horrors that he's feeling in his physical state. "I cannot live, I cannot die," is the line that perfectly encapsulates the hell that Bonham is in. And as the song closes, the soldier grows angrier in tone as he desperately pleads to God for him to end his helpless life. One is noted as being the first Metallica song to ever chart, as well as the first Metallica song to be accompanied with a music video, which featured footage from the film adaptation of Johnny Got His Gun. The legendary Metallica track got its name from one particular piece from the book that would later inspire the creation of the hit. How can a man lose as much of himself as I have and still live? When a man buys a lottery ticket, you never expect him to win because it's 1,000,000 to 1 shot. But if he does win, you'll believe it, because 1 in 1,000,000 still leaves 1. If I'd read about a guy like me in the paper, I wouldn't believe it, because it's 1,000,000 to 1. But 1,000,000 to 1 always leaves 1. I never expect it to happen to me, because the odds of it happening are 1,000,000 to 1. But 1,000,000 to 1 always leaves 1. 1. In his 2000 book, Angry Blonde, Eminem wrote, "I remember I was watching a movie one day that inspired me to write a love song, but I didn't want to make any corny love song. It had to be some bugged out shit." The bugged out shit in question would later become Kim, the controversial 16th track of the classic album The Marshall Mathers LP, and a prequel song to 97 Bonnie and Clyde from the Slim Shady LP released a year prior. On Kim, Eminem abhorrently lashes out on his then ex-wife for cheating on him in the midst of the couple raising their baby daughter. M's songwriting and delivery on the track has been noted as indescribably disturbing by many listeners, as throughout each of the 3 verses, he takes on the roles of both himself and Kim as he violently berates her for her wrongdoings, while Kim begs and pleads with M to have more compassion. Aside from its maniacal lyrics, perhaps what makes Kim so terrifying is just how naturally M screams and curses at his wife, putting on full display his rawest emotions in the instance he finds himself in. Feeling backstabbed and betrayed, M continues shouting insults towards his wife, scolding her for cheating on him despite the fact that he planned on spending the rest of his life with her. The song then takes a much more violent turn when M murders the man that Kim cheated on him with, and later even murdering his 4-year-old son via a throat slit, all while he psychotically boasts about his homicidal behavior and ridicules Kim for sleeping with a man who is now dead. The track closes with M preparing to murder Kim herself for what she's done, even making up a fictional scene that portrays M as innocent in the eyes of authorities despite him having murdered an entire family. M expresses his rage and regret over her actions one final time, shouting that she was supposed to love him before finally slitting her throat and killing her, demently screaming, "Bleed, bitch, bleed," as she chokes on her own blood. Since its release, Kim has been regarded as one of, if not the most explicit Eminem track he has ever recorded, and one of the most sonically gruesome hip-hop songs in history. Even the line that sees Eminem revealing how he murdered a 4-year-old boy was later censored upon the release of the Marshall Mathers LP, truly highlighting how grotesque the songwriting on Kim really was, even for the unfiltered era of the 90s. Nowadays, Eminem chooses not to perform Kim at his live shows, which is frankly a very understandable decision, but the track has remained a deranged cult classic among his many stans, who still appreciate the song for its raw and heavy aggression and horrifying lyricism. 100 Years is the intro track of The Cure's gothic opus Pornography, released in 1982. The song is a political anthem that touches on a range of subjects from self-hatred and tyranny to war and prostitution. Backed by a frenzied and ominous instrumental, Robert Smith sings from the perspective of a person who has seemingly lost all sincerity within their life, no longer showing a care or passion for living and viewing everyone and every moment as dull and grim, a reality that Smith himself was all too familiar with during the recording of the track. When I started working on Pornography, I was so strange that I entered my flat and I didn't even recognize it. It looked like a Polanski film, but maybe it was also because of the drugs I was taking. I felt a sort of horror for everything physically related. I hated the fleshy world. I hated myself more than everybody else. I thought the inner side of life was horrible. It's strange to think about now. At the time, I disliked the human race, and I didn't give a damn if we all died. Later in the song, Smith provides social commentary on war coverage as well as corruption within governments and bodies of the military. Through a series of personifying lines, Smith highlights that many soldiers fighting in the hundreds of deadly wars ongoing in the present day fail to genuinely comprehend just what it is they're battling for. Soldiers may have been told from the powers that be that through their bloodshed they are bringing justice to the planet, but Smith takes a much more harrowing, pragmatic approach in that these same soldiers are stripping away their individuality for a cause that may ultimately do more harm than good to the world. It's this grisly reality, reminiscent of classic dystopian works such as George Orwell's 1984, that leads to the speaker growing even using this war imagery as a way to express their own mental suffering and vividly depicting their own via hate towards the closing of the track. Ultimately, the song is unfulfilling and even disheartening in nature. It focuses on how humans bring so much suffering onto themselves through war and exploitation, and even when no parties ever benefit from these tragedies, society still continues to repeat this cycle of pain for years on end, at times up to as long as a century, hence the track's name. Those who have recognized this, whether through news coverage or even seeing it with their own eyes, live the rest of their lives with an inescapable feeling of existential dread and fear, which in turn may cause for their everyday lives to become monotonous and just outright insufferable. And even when they die and this depressing life comes to a close, the speaker then begs the question, what legacy is being left behind? The song even makes an allusion to someone jumping off a high building, with the only bit of recognition being received on such a tragic event being a mere story on the radio, only further emphasizing the theme of worthlessness present throughout the entire track. Everything covered on 100 Years is incredibly demoralizing, incredibly dispiriting, and maybe most importantly, incredibly truthful and real. And in the views of many, this is what makes the song so incredibly disturbing. Compared to the rest of Nevermind, Polly is much more sonically bare and simplistic, but through sludgy acoustic guitar strumming, the song tells an unsettling and true story of a 14-year-old girl who was abducted and later following a punk rock concert that took place in Tacoma, Washington in 1987. For privacy reasons, the girl's real name has not been released to the public, though Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain has nicknamed her Polly, but soon after she was kidnapped by a man named Gerald Friend, he would repeatedly torture and her at his home in heinous ways, up until he was later arrested following the girl's escape. After having heard of the event through a newspaper, Kurt Cobain chose to write the morbid Polly from the perspective of the perpetrator himself. Throughout the song, listeners are able to glimpse into the sadistic mindset of the criminal, who's kidnapped a young girl named Polly and kept her in confinement while he continues torturing her. More specifically in the first and second verses, as well as in the chorus, the narrator frequently makes an analogy between the abduction of the innocent victim and a bird trapped in a cage, its wings tied and severed, in pain and starving, and eternally scarred both physically and emotionally. The common phrase, "Polly wants a cracker," is even repeated in the first two verses, using the otherwise playful saying to further detail not only the anguished state Polly the girl is in, but how her kidnapper views her merely as a restrained animal, one they want to train to do as they say through senseless torture and later in the track, the narrator seems to falsely believe that their victim has given in to their psychotic tendencies, and as such, has gradually started sympathizing with the young girl, as well as developing trust. The captor believes the two have developed a sick relationship of sorts, when in reality, the victim has been pretending to enjoy what is being done to her in an attempt to catch the criminal off guard and make her escape, which she would ultimately do so. This outcome does similarly correlate with the real-life escape made by the girl kidnapped by Gerald Friend in 1987, who ran from his truck as he was parked at a gas station and alerted others present of the situation she was in, which promptly led to authorities being called in and Friend being arrested. The monster later given 2 75-year sentences to prison. Kurt Cobain has since declared that Polly is very much an anti-rape song, and Nirvana have also made significant contributions to the support of women's rights and feminism, such as their Rock Against Rape concert in 1993, which was a benefit show that helped raise money for a women's self-defense organization. Polly wasn't the only song Nirvana made with themes surrounding sexual assault. As a matter of fact, look no further than the explicitly titled Rape Me, a song featured on Nirvana's final studio album In Utero, which stemmed from Cobain's frustration over critics failing to recognize Polly's anti-rape themes, culminating into a much more aggressive and outspoken track focusing on similar messages.
It's an let me repeat that, anti-rape song. I don't know, I just got tired of people trying to put too much meaning into my lyrics, it's being too, not making enough sense, so I decided to be really blunt and bold.
Cobain has always been one of the largest advocates for the justice of female victims of sexual abuse, and uses uncomfortable yet unmistakable language to tell around the world that it will inevitably arrive and lead to the downfall of their lives. The track can be viewed as a defiant anti-rape statement, one that shows a victim who doesn't necessarily give in with shame, but instead takes back their control through their will to survive such trauma and seek future retribution for the damage these monsters have done. In the words of Cobain, it's like she's saying, "Rape me, go ahead, rape me, beat me, you'll never kill me. I'll survive this, and I'm gonna fucking rape you one of these days, and you won't even know it." With the narrator of the song highlighting how many other victims of assault will soon come forward to bring upon the comeuppance of the criminal, Cobain is able to provide poetic justice through statements and offer support for women and any victims of rape in general, reassuring that karma will catch up. Clearly, the song uses bold and rather vulgar expressions to convey the powerful declarations being made. And when some critics felt as if it was made in a poor and inappropriate taste due to Cobain using such vexed language from a masculine standpoint, he would respond back to their concerns, first by reaffirming that the track is, again, anti-rape, and then providing a much more knowledgeable insight on the song's deeper meaning. I understand that point of view, and I've heard it a lot. I've gone back and forth between regretting it and trying to defend myself. Basically, I was trying to write a song that supported women and dealt with the issue of over the last few years, people have had such a hard time understanding what our message is, what we're trying to convey, that I just decided to be as bold as possible. How hard should I stamp at this point? How big should I make the letters? It's not a pretty image, but a woman who is infuriated with the situation, it's like, go ahead, baby, just go for it, because you're gonna get it. I'm a firm believer in karma, and that motherfucker is going to get what he deserves eventually. That man will be caught, he'll go to jail, and he'll be. So me, do it. Get it over with, because you're gonna get it worse. The standout Pearl Jam track Jeremy is about two equally harrowing true stories that both detail the tragic effects of childhood bullying. As hinted in the song's title, the first is the story of Jeremy Wade Dell, a 15-year-old boy from suburban Dallas-Fort Worth who had shot himself in front of his classmates at Richardson High School on the morning of January 8th, 1991. Noted by his peers as real quiet, Jeremy arrived to class late on that fateful day and was told by his second period English teacher to head to the school's office and retrieve an admitted slip. When he left, everyone assumed that Jeremy was doing just that, and the day would go on as normal. But instead, the boy returned with a .375 Magnum revolver. Though they were perplexed, the class would have little time to react as Jeremy stood up in front of the classroom and said to his teacher, "Miss, I got what I really went for," before aiming the barrel at his mouth and pulling the trigger. Lead singer Eddie Vedder stated that he had heard about the dreadful incident through a newspaper clipping he read in the coming weeks. And from his discovery of the story, a realization dawned upon Vedder in that heartbreaking stories of trauma and death similar to Jeremy's ultimately failed to receive widespread coverage despite occurring on an all too frequent basis, with usually the most ever culminating from these events being a mere paragraph within a small article. Having been emotionally touched by Jeremy's story, Vedder wrote this song in remembrance of his life and the moments leading up to his untimely death, while also bringing more attention to an otherwise unrecognized case of trauma gone unnoticed. As according to outside sources, even Jeremy's own school has barely ever mentioned him or the occurrence ever since it took place. A large part of why Vedder was so attached to the story also has to do with his own personal experiences starring a student he knew from middle school named Brian in 1991, whom he also touches on in the latter half of the track. Though Brian never took his own life, he would go on to commit another vile act in the form of shooting up a geography classroom, as told by Vedder himself in a later interview. I remember being in the halls and hearing it, and I had actually had altercations with this kid in the past. I was kind of a rebellious 5th grader, and I think we got in fights and stuff. On Jeremy, Vedder recalls Brian as seemingly harmless, and although the two tended to get into skirmishes at times, no one could have ever imagined the violence he would unleash onto his peers, much like how Jeremy's classmates and family members have been entirely unaware of all the trauma he was dealing with that would later accumulate to his. Jeremy received much acclaim upon its release as a single, largely in part due to the song's accompanying video that features a morbid depiction of the very scene of Jeremy Dell's death. This video in particular has always been a favorite of mine, not only for its incredibly intense imagery, but also for the number of messages and phrases that are flashed throughout the duration of the video, some of which can be viewed as the words of outsiders describing Jeremy from their oblivious perspectives, while other times, a number of biblical allusions are used in relation to the scenes taking place on screen, including words from Genesis 3:1, Mark 5:13, and Genesis 3:6, a verse which tells of sin entering the world, and in Jeremy's case, resulting in his death. It should also be noted that in the decades following the song's release, Jeremy's family has come forward and stated that the song inspired by their son's death is rather inaccurate, as it is ultimately unknown if bullying was the main cause for Jeremy's, and the song is more likely loosely based on his story, as well as Vedder's personal experiences with Brian, as opposed to a literal lyrical depiction of what took place, which tells the perspectives of both a victim of bullying who later commits and one of their fellow classmates who is left guilty over their actions. Frogs is a song by Seattle grunge band Alice in Chains featured on their eponymous third studio album released in November of 1995. It is by far their longest track, clocking in at 8 minutes and 18 seconds, and is considered by many listeners as their most hallowing, as the song focuses on many bleak themes such as isolation, betrayal, and addiction. Over a menacing and dooming instrumental, the late Lane Staley sings of his issues surrounding disingenuous friendships, as well as his own personal struggles with overcoming substance abuse. Lines such as, "What does a friend mean to you? A word so wrongfully abused, all included but you alone," truly emphasized on the loneliness Staley experienced during his time alive and in the industry, feeling as if those around him really cared for his well-being because of the fame he possessed and the money they'd earned from him, as opposed to any genuine emotional connection or reason. Others, such as pupils widen and change their hue, rapid brown, avoid clear blue, uses desolate symbolism to represent the dysfunction within the relationship between Staley and his then-fiancée, Demry Parrott. Parrott notably had brown eyes, while Staley's were clear blue. Roughly a year after the release of Frogs, Parrott would pass away from a heart infection as a result of addiction after being in and out of the hospital for a prolonged period of time. According to those around him, her death left Staley utterly devastated, turning him rather reclusive while he spent years mourning the loss of his soulmates, even despite the issues they may have had. In the chorus, Staley begs the question of why his life is the way that it is. He longs for a life where he is clean off drugs, married to his late girlfriend, and is living happily and flourishingly off his wealth and fame. But instead, his life is shrouded in depression, dejection, and death, with no signs of a better future. Staley later makes a reference to the ill-famed 27 Club in the outro of the song, which consists of famous musicians, actors, or celebrities who have all passed away by the age of 27. Though he himself didn't become part of this club, Staley prophesizes that his dreadful lifestyle will still lead to his premature demise one way or another, and in a haunting twist of fate, Staley's lyrics would bleed into reality. Staley tragically passed away as a result of a speedball overdose on April 5, 2002, never living to see himself truly overcome the obstacles he faced in his life. Self-produced by 19-year-old Tyler himself, Tron Cat is a song featured on the American rapper's debut studio album Goblin, released in 2011. The track is part of a conceptual narrative between the project's protagonist Tyler and his therapist Dr. TC, who Tyler later learns is merely a figment of his imagination. Regardless, the two take part in a number of fictional therapy sessions all throughout the duration of the album, as Tyler shares his darkest and most personal thoughts from the back of his mind within each individual song, gradually growing more twisted as the sessions progress. Tron Cat is by far one of the more vulgar tracks Goblin has to offer, with the lyrics being a depiction of some of Tyler's disturbing intrusive thoughts being brought to light through a conversation with his psychiatrist. Edgy lines and inflammatory wordplay are present all throughout the song, including a number of braggadocious bars about Odd Future and the music they've produced, grotesque threats to anyone who's wronged Tyler or his clique, and last but certainly not least, a series of sexual lines featuring some of the most descriptive and abominable imagery you will ever hear in a rap song. Though just about every bar on Tron Cat could be picked out and surgically dissected for its incredibly explicit lyricism, some of the most infamous lines on the track, as well as the album in general, can be heard towards the middle of the song where Tyler raps, "Victim, victim, honey you're my fifth one, honey on that top end when I stuff you in my system, pregnant bitch and tell my friends I had a threesome." I mean, this shit really gives 90s Eminem a run for his fucking money. The rest of the lyrics within the entire song are equally as deranged and unapologetically offensive as the ones I've just read, and with that being said, you can imagine how poorly they've aged in the coming years, especially amongst Tyler's newfound fanbase consisting of, well, let's be honest, lighthearted fans in comparison to the demographic being targeted on his notorious debut record. Even Tyler's imaginary therapist, Dr. TC, is left speechless by his own psyche as he immediately opts to change the topic of discussion and put the violent thoughts being expressed in a far away place. I'll be honest, this is one of my absolute favorite songs of all time. Hurts by 9 Inch Nails, the closing track off their conceptual masterpiece, The Downward Spiral, serves as the coda to a lifelong journey of torment and despair presented in the form of a musical narrative. The protagonist of the album is a man who has lost everything in his life and is slowly driven to insanity, his mental state spiraling downward up until the climax of the project where he finally commits with a gun in the penultimate title track. Hurts follows up on this as the narrator reflects on his life and what has become of it now that he is dead, morosely dwelling on his everlasting battle with addiction, the dreadful isolation he experienced while alive, and the legacy of agony he has left behind in the world. Sonically, the song is distorted, funereal, and depressingly somber, almost capturing the exact feelings one would endure in the aftermath of a devastating Guitar strings are quietly plucked and bent all throughout the track, with a lingering noise loop also being implemented as a means of making the listener feel sick. While lead singer Trent Reznor sings of his hopelessness in the most utterly soul-crushing tone imaginable. Reznor's soft yet disheartening delivery is just perfect for this song, as the pain in his voice conveys the tragedy the protagonist has suffered through in his life of misery, pondering over the moments that have led up to his demise, while realizing how worthless himself and everything else in life has become in the end. Whether it was as a result of substance abuse or mental illness, everything in the protagonist's life is now ruined. His empire has become an empire of dirt, and he feels as if he is an imposter to everyone he's ever met and let down, having lived an existence full of trauma and hardships beyond repair. Defeatingly, the narrator asks the question of what has become of himself in his final moments before transitioning to the next life, and although pulling the trigger may bring his physical life to an end, the pain and hurt he feels in this and every other moment in his existence will never go away. The protagonist fantasizes of a second chance, thinking that maybe in another life, he would have steered away from the foul influences that sent him into a downward spiral and live a better, more comfortable existence. But the reality is that there's no turning back from what he has done, and it makes for an utterly heartbreaking ending to an already lachrymose body of work. When the narrator's sorrowful epiphany concludes, out of nowhere comes a thunderous set of power chords that loudly explode over Reznor's singing. For the remaining minute and 28 seconds, and a culminating drone plays out and ends the record off on an utterly tragic note, allowing for the listener to truly sink in the listening experience they have just endured. Now, there are a number of ways that hurt has been interpolated among fans and critics of Nine Inch Nails. Some view it as the apt closer of the concept album, where the protagonist ends up taking his own life. Others think the song has to do more with drugs and substance abuse, and serves more of a dirge to a user who has suffered its deadly effects, and some believe the song comes from the narrator surviving his attempt. Substance abuse is undoubtedly a theme present on the track, as well as the album entirely, but I'm personally led to believe that Hurt is a final reflection of the life of a man that has taken his own. Listening to the song feels the exact same way as reading a note in real life, and that's what makes it so unbelievably saddening and disturbing to me. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Reznor stated, "Hurt is a song based on the most personal sentiments, the deepest emotions I have ever had. We were crying when we made it. It was so intense. I didn't know if I even wanted to put it on the album." Many people may know Hurt from the equally gut-wrenching Johnny Cash cover done in 2002. As a matter of fact, his cover has garnered so much acclaim that a considerable amount of people have mistaken it to be Cash's original song. And even Reznor himself believes that the country legend has rightfully earned the song from him with his performance. I popped the video in and wow. Tears welling, silence, goosebumps. Wow. I feel like I just lost my girlfriend because that song isn't mine anymore. Listen to both if you haven't. They're incredible and deserve all the praise. And with that, we have wrapped up the first tier of the iceberg. Let's move on to tier 2, which actually has a lot more of my personal favorites. Released in 2001 by Harlem MC Immortal Technique, Dance with the Devil is a sinister standout track that is notorious for its gut-wrenching storytelling and indescribably disturbing final twist. Based on an allegedly true story, Technique raps about the life of a 13-year-old boy named William, who grew up with no father and a mother who is recovering from substance abuse, and is now surrounded by gang affiliates with a personal ambition to fully embrace a gangster lifestyle himself. William ends up dropping out of school to chase his materialistic dreams, selling drugs and robbing other criminals, all as a means of earning respect amongst the community he's a part of. However, William later faces an obstacle in the form of his own arrest. Those around him realize that William was rather submissive upon being apprehended by authorities, and thus his street credibility had been severely tarnished. After being released from jail, William learns that it's now up to him to prove his worth and toughness to the criminals he was affiliated with and earn back the respect that he had lost. He goes about this in malevolent fashion, as he turns up a notch on his violent and wicked tendencies to show that he is very much serious about living the lifestyle he long desired for. William continues robbing as well as starting fights, selling crack, and working overtime just to rebuild his reputation in the streets. The boy hated being treated like just another kid trying to act tough, because he believes that he is much more than that, and has yet to truly receive an opportunity to prove his value in a gang. Some members of William's crew take note of his upped antics, but are still left unimpressed because any motherfucking coward can sell drugs, but only a real thug can stab someone until they die, standing in front of them, staring straight into their eyes. His crew wanted to truly put William up to the test and see if he really had what it took to become part of a gang, which is what the boy himself had long desired for. And so, on a Friday night, William and his gang searched the streets for a vulnerable victim to a vile act that was suggested by William to prove his cold-heartedness. The gang spotted a woman walking alone as she was on her way home from work, and realizing that this was their golden opportunity, they attacked. The gang exited the car they were in and jumped her, knocking her to the floor as William prepared to make an impression on his crew. The boy continued the assaults on the innocent woman. She desperately tried fighting back, but it was no use. He then dragged her to the top of a building, all while she clawed and screamed for her life, where William and his crew ruthlessly stomped on her body, breaking her ribs and her jaw. William and the gang then raped the woman, who by now was bloodied and rendered unable to even speak from her throat having been burned. With the damage being done, a gang member pulled out a gun, handed it over to William, and told him that if he finishes her off, he will be guaranteed a placement within the crew. William stood in front of his defenseless victim, much like how the narrator of the song previously depicted, and readied himself to pull the trigger and put an end to her grueling agony. Just as William was about to pull though, he removed the bloodstained shirt that had been covering the woman's face the entire time she was assaulted, and made a discovery that would destroy him. As it turns out, the woman was his own mother. She looked back at him and cried because he had forsaken her. She cried more painfully than when they were her. His whole world stopped. He could even contemplate. His corruption had successfully changed his fate. And he remembered how his mom used to come home late, working hard for nothing, because now what was he worth? He turned away from the woman that had once given him birth. The woman William and his gang had just beaten, tortured senseless in the most unspeakable of ways, was the very woman that birthed the boy and worked tirelessly to steer him away from the life he had tragically fallen into, even if it costed her own well-being. The revelation devastated both William and his mother, but as much as he wanted to bawl and scream over what he did to his own blood, William already made his decision in life, and there was officially no turning back. But the boy couldn't bear living after what he had done, and the narrator later details William ending his own life by jumping off the building's roof before managing to kill his own mother. Towards the end of the track, Technique raps, he turned away from the woman that had once given him birth, and crying out to the sky because he was lonely and scared. But only the devil responded, because God wasn't there. So when the devil wants to dance with you, you better say never, because a dance with the devil might last you forever. It's one thing for a track to tell an edgy story or vividly depict a gruesome chain of events, but something like this, a song as raw, depressingly truthful, and outright horrifying in the end as this, is just an unparalleled kind of disturbing. Dance with the Devil is a song that will fuck you up when you hear it for the first time. This being Technique's intention from the very start as a means of raising awareness of the unjust murders of women happening all around the world, suffering a fate similar to William's own mother. This is another one of my absolute favorites on the iceberg, and there's so much content within the storytelling of the song that I could spend ages explaining its deeper meaning, but for time's sake, I'll keep it concise. Blood Hail is the second track off of post-punk band Have a Nice Life's debut 2008 record, Deaf Consciousness. Now, accompanied with Deaf Consciousness is a 70-paged fictional booklet that follows the life and teachings of a 13th century Italian philosopher and religious figure known as Antiochus. It is in this pamphlet where Deaf Consciousness's themes of death, existential dread, and transcendental nihilism are thoroughly explored through documenting the religious stories of Antiochus, with each individual track on the musical body of work conveying his lectures into sound and going along with the sequence of events as they unfold. Narratively, Bloodhail follows the Hunter, a character with a quest to kill God himself by striking him from the heavens with a flurry of arrows. Backed by pounding drums and an anonymous electric guitar, the song lyrically depicts the Hunter as a misanthropic being, feeling a sense of indifference towards life and humankind, and not having a care for the world collapsing before him. I feel the top of the room come off, kill everybody there, and I'm watching all the stars burn out, trying to pretend that I care. It's these set of lines that perfectly encapsulates the overarching theme of apathy, using an event as grand as the death of a star as symbolism of everything and anything having an inevitable end, to which the narrator seems somberly content with. But I didn't. No one ever does. And I would. No one ever will. Can't you see it's all flown out of my hands? The question being asked within the chorus, in particular, can be interpreted in two separate ways, which could perhaps connect to express one larger theme. For one, the narrator could be asking the question on a conceptual level. Having fired arrows at God, the Hunter has commenced an attack on the most powerful being in the universe, and no longer has control over the outcome of his battle. On the other hand, the metaphor of killing a god may have been used to emphasize the depression that frontman Dan Barrett faced during the recordings of Death Consciousness. Feeling as if overcoming such dread and darkness was an all but impossible task he may have had no control over at the time, much like the Hunter with a desire to murder God. Later in the track, a scene is depicted of a number of humans gathering to form a massive staircase of bodies, using their arms and legs to hook onto each sweaty bod and make individual steps for the Hunter to ascend to heaven. Then, when the Hunter reaches the sky, he opens fire with his bow and shoots a hail of arrows, each repetition of the word arrowheads being every distinct arrow that the Hunter unleashes. We later learn through distant echoes in the album's booklet that the Hunter was successful in his quest, as God is later revealed to have died and fallen down to earth, before being eaten by 1,000 animals on the ground. The Hunter thanks God for his death, as his quest has been fulfilled and he has now become the new leader of humanity. Through its lyrics, Bloodhail makes a number of references to the booklet of Antiochus's lectures, including the very moment when the Hunter begins firing at God, which had also been vividly described in the pamphlet. And at the very top, where he was alone but not alone, he pulled back his string and he tied in his bow and said nothing at all. Just breathed and held it a moment and then let everything go. No troubles, no fears, no people, no forests, no animals, no earth, no space, no souls, no nothing, no anything. And there were arrowheads, 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 everywhere. The Hunter's feelings of hopelessness and indifference can be considered as similar to that of one suffering from depression. And with this, the narrator establishes a cold metaphor for insouciance. Even if the Hunter is now immortal, the universe and everything else within it will still pass away and leave him equally as apathetic as when he was just a mere mortal. Again, there is a lot more to this song, along with its successor track titled Hunter, so listen to it yourself if you haven't already. Daddy is the emotional outro off of nu metal staple Korn's debut self-titled record. On it, lead singer Jonathan Davis shares perhaps the darkest and most personal moment of his entire life. A time when Davis had been molested by his own babysitter while he was still a child. In a runtime of nearly 18 minutes, Daddy sees Davis recount the traumatic experience of having been by someone who he previously believed he could trust. The lyrics take a glimpse into the twisted mind of the abuser themselves, viewing a young Davis as if he was innocent prey and detailing their vile intentions with the boy. A little child looking so pretty. Come out and play, I'll be your daddy. Innocent child looking so sweet. I'll rape your mind and now your flesh I reap. On the chorus, David expresses the pain and torment he felt after having been violated so horrifically. His sentence is broken and his words sporadic. The language Davis uses also captures a childlike innocence, as he can notably be heard still trying to collect himself and fully fathom what has been done to him. I feel dirty. It hurts as a child. Tied down, that's a good boy, and your own child. I scream, no one hears me. It hurts. I'm not a liar. My God, saw you watch. Mommy, why your own child? Arguably the most harrowing detail to take from here is how Davis revealed that his own mother didn't believe what happened to him when he tried bringing the incident to her attention. Davis almost feels betrayed by her ignorance, as she doesn't show any concern for her own son having been taken advantage of and traumatized by a person she has carelessly allowed into their lives. Davis has further explained these lines in a more recent video, while also clarifying that his abuser was not his own parents as some may have presumed.
It's not about my parents smoking me and any of that shit. It was about me being abused by someone else and my parents not really believing me, which I believe happens to tons of kids. I believe tons of kids go back and say, hey mom, dad, this shit happened. They're like, stop fucking lying. Or they don't understand, and they were really young at the time, and I don't.
As a child, Davis profusely pleads for someone close to him to believe what has happened to him and assist him in seeking justice, but tragically, no one does, which leaves Davis no other choice but to recover on his own without his abuser ever being punished. The latter half of the track features what I can only describe as one of the most soul-crushing moments in probably any song I've ever heard. Now speaking from the present, Davis screams out several insults towards his abuser, stating that they've ruined his life after what happened. Following this, Davis violently bawls for minutes on end, an utterly devastating moment of vulnerability which was very much authentic as stated by Davis and his bandmates. When we ended the song, Jonathan was still crying. I could see him through the window from the drum booth. He was actually on the floor crying, and Ross was in the control room, talking in our ears, going, "Keep going," making a rolling motion with his hand. So we just kept going. Davis himself has said, and I remember that moment when I came out of there, and I was fucking sobbing. My whole band was crying, and they all just hugged me and shit. It was a crazy fucking experience. It was the good old days, dude. We were all a band of brothers. Korn's intense outro track is one that the band has been notably hesitant on performing live, but during their 20th anniversary tour in 2015, the song was included within their setlist for the first time since 1995, as well as every other track featured from their self-titled record, demonstrating that Davis has since overcome the deeply scarring event. It's not going to affect me like it did back then. There was abuse there, I double fit, and the person who has abused me is dead now. Karma took him. And you know, I've buried that. I'm just going to play the song for the people that need it. You know what I mean? Though the song is widely viewed as Korn's darkest, many of the band's fans have since expressed their gratitude for its creation, as it's allowed for many other victims of to no longer feel isolated within their lives and overcome such an awful situation. The intro track on Detroit rapper Danny Brown's 2016 release Atrocity Exhibition, Downward Spiral serves as the tone setter for the manic and distressing listening experience that is the rest of the body of work. The song largely focuses on a number of themes prevalent throughout the album, providing listeners a glimpse of Brown's deteriorating mental state while further mentioning how narcotic withdrawal, drug abuse, and thoughts have all negatively impacted his life. Brown lists out several symptoms relating to narcotic withdrawal within the track, including delirium, paranoia, and even other sexual side effects such as erectile dysfunction. All of these effects have significantly overwhelmed Brown, and it renders him unable to appreciate the good things he has in his life, all while he isolates himself with alcohol and drugs and mentally further descends into a downward spiral. The song itself is an allusion to the title track off of Brown's second album, 30, where he also touches on vulnerable subjects such as thoughts, arguably on a level equally as intimate as he does on Atrocity Exhibition. Turning to these drugs, now these drugs turned my life, and it's the downward spiral, got me but too scared to do it, so these pills will be the rifle. Although Brown feels as if he's stuck in an endless cycle of depression and suffering, he's still able to recognize the troubling circumstances he finds himself in and vows to make changes for the better and figure a way out of his vices before things go from bad to worse. The remaining 14 tracks follow Brown's journey of overcoming these demons, with each visceral piece showcasing some of the darkest, most disturbing corners of his life through chaotic instrumentals, hysterical lyricism, and eerie yet impactful vocal performances. This is, to me, one of the most menacing, most haunting songs I have ever heard, maybe across all genres. I Just Killed a Cop, Now I'm Horny, the 12th track from experimental rapper JPEG Mafia's debut studio album Black Ben Carson, is a facetious yet aptly titled song, as it largely explores the injustices of police brutality through a story surrounding JPEG himself being pulled over by an officer. The song as a whole presents a very dismaying sound sonically, but what I believe is the most disturbing portion by far comes at the very beginning. The track starts quiet and almost tranquil, being led in with a soothing sample of Agenda by Ayaso. Before then, an audio recording plays of the notorious murder of Deputy Kyle Dinkeller. Dinkeller, an officer hailing from San Diego, California, had pulled over a Vietnam War veteran named Andrew Brannon for speeding in Lawrence County, Georgia in 1998. Dinkeller first approaches Brannon in a casual manner and requests for him to keep his hands out of his pockets, but the situation escalates when Brannon refuses to do so. Brannon grows increasingly more reckless towards the officer as the video progresses, yelling and even taunting him to open fire at him. Feeling threatened by his behavior, Dinkeller pulls out his pistol and warns Brannon to stay away from him, who had now exited his vehicle and aggressively motioned towards the officer. Initially, Brannon appears to comply as he then walks back into his vehicle. Moments later, however, he returns with an M1 carbine and begins firing at the officer. A shootout commences between the two, which ultimately resulted in Dinkeller wounding Brannon and Brannon murdering the officer, having fired a fatal shot into his eye. Many have noted Dinkeller's blood-curdling screams as the most gut-wrenching portion of the entire recording, as it captures the officer's horrifying final moments before being murdered by the demented war veteran. The entirety of the incident was captured on video from the dashcam of Dinkeller's patrol car, and since then has been frequently used in American police academies to demonstrate the necessity of self-defense to recruits. Brannon later pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, further stating that the murder came as a result of triggered PTSD from his services in Vietnam. However, the jury would still sentence the veteran to death on January 30th, 2000, and was executed by lethal injection over 17 years after the murder on January 13th, 2015. Now, the inclusion of the unsettling video into the song's intro has received backlash from a considerable amount of listeners, though in context of the track, it highlights the shoot first, ask questions later attitude within many of America's officers, including those who predominantly target minorities and treat them in an unjust manner, even if they are unarmed or innocent. This is something that JPEG emphasizes on in the latter half of the song, as he depicts a scenario where a motorist is pulled over and racially profiled by an officer, but done so lyrically in an almost romantic fashion. Similar to the murder of Dinkeller though, the song takes a violent turn where the motorist is depicted shooting the officer dead, later stating, "Now who's the owner?" JPEG Mafia has gained a reputation for using incredibly explicit lyricism or imagery to send an overarching message to his listeners, and I Just Killed a Cop, Now I'm Horny is perhaps the most prominent example of this, as it's here where he makes a point in that an equal level of disgust and revulsion should be felt for the countless cases of police brutalities against innocent minorities as listening to the ghastly recording of Dinkeller's final moments. On an archived Bandcamp page, JPEG Mafia had this to say about the controversial track. It's a real story about getting pulled over by a police officer, but it's presented as if it's a love song. I'll spare you the details, but being fucked with by police is a regular occurrence for people no matter what background you come from, and I have no sympathy for any cop at all. Sometimes I joke about things in a serious way, but understand that I am not kidding in any way, shape, nor form when I say that a police officer's life is not worth a piece of garbage to me. People need to practice their Second Amendment rights and stop taking shit from these roaches. Don't be scared, know your rights. Admittedly, this is a pretty straightforward yet mystifying song. Careful with That Axe Eugene is a 60s instrumental piece by the legendary band Pink Floyd that, through its faint vocal utterances, depicts two people in a forest cutting down a tree, the spacious drums in the background representing each chop of an axe. A man named Eugene is cutting down this tree while another unnamed man rests on the side. He seems to notice Eugene acting daringly with the axe at hand and calls out to him, "Careful with that axe, Eugene." Before then, vocalist Roger Waters can be heard screaming at the top of his lungs. He screams two separate times during the track, the first symbolizing the wrestling man being struck with the axe, and the second being the very moment when Eugene realized that he had unintentionally murdered his own friend. The song was originally a B-side to another one of the band's singles titled Point Me at the Sky. Ironically though, it was the immense instrumental that turned out to be the fan favorite over the A-side, and it would later become an acclaimed song for Pink Floyd to play during their years of live shows. Solace is definitely one of the more intriguing tracks on this list to me, as it's essentially an EP presented in the style of one single song with a series of parts. Make no mistake though, each individual portion of Soulless is an emotionally intense and vulnerable musical piece that American rapper Earl Sweatshirt wrote and dedicated to his mother in 2015. Earl is quoted as stating that Soulless is music from when I hit the bottom and found something. And through dreary songwriting and somber, jazz-esque instrumentals, he shares his newfound revelations with the listener during one of the darkest periods of his life, a time when Earl's existence had been shrouded in an unforgiving depression. As previously mentioned, the track is divided into a total of 5 separate sections for a runtime of exactly 10 minutes. Part 1 shows Earl exploring the emotional distraught he faces on a daily basis. He describes the depression he suffers from as if he was experiencing a kind of deja vu, stating that he's been here before. Soulless is far from the only time that Earl has mentioned his bleak mental state up until this point, as it was a very large theme surrounding his previous 2015 release titled I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. The pain he describes within this album is similar to that of what he expresses in Soulless, further detailing how he regularly deals with a crippling depression that has been destroying his life. Earl wistfully touches on his moments of isolation, lack of appetite, and a general feeling of devastation. Late for everything, my face to the cement. That's how I always seen it. I spent days fading and anemic. You could see it in my face. I ain't been eating. I'm just wasting away. He compares his pains to that of the late American actor River Phoenix, who passed away at age 23 due to a drug-induced heart failure. Earl believes that because he resorts to smoking and using substances to cope with his depression, he may very well suffer the same fate as the 20th century actor, and in the grim scenario that he does, Earl hauntingly requests for his ashes to be mailed to his own mother. We see Earl trying to make sense of all of his vices, and even when he attempts to encourage himself to make changes for the better, he feels as if he's too far gone mentally and has fully indulged in his bad habits. Trying to make some sense of all this shit in my brain, one foot stuck in a tar pit of my ways. Following a brief instrumental bit where the sounds of bottles clinking and liquid pouring can be heard, perhaps an allusion to his addictions, the track transitions to part 2, once again highlighting the deja vu he's experiencing from his depression and sorrowfully realizing how alone he is in his life. During a time when he needs it the most, Earl has no help from anybody, partially due to his lack of genuine trust as well as introverted nature. Earl also acknowledges that he is stuck in a continuous cycle of engaging in troubling behaviors such as substance abuse, and even though he knows this is bad for him, he feels too depressed to find the motivation to make any positive changes. And according to Earl, he's fixing to give up on his life because of it. Part 3 is solely an instrumental piece, which is an upbeat shift in mood sonically, but still feels almost bittersweet when listening. After this, part 4 commences and returns to the abstract and solemn style of production from the previous portions. In the final spoken verse of the track, Earl mourns his late grandmother, wishing that she was still around to help him through this dark period of his life. I got my grandma on my hands. I start to cry when I see him, because they remind me of seeing her. These are the times that I need her the most, because I feel defeated. Earl gets as personal as he's ever been in the final lines of the verse, telling the truth surrounding him and his demons in the most forthright way he possibly can. He admits to his eating disorders, drug abuse, and thoughts, and that he wishes he spent more time with the few remaining friends he has in his life. To tell the truth, I got a problem with eating, I be drugging. To tell the truth, I'm not supposed to be off in here. I'm supposed to be sleeping, but I be turning and tossing. To tell the truth, I miss my partnerdom. To tell the truth, you can't be loud when you need the wrongest, fam. But time waits for no man, and death waits with cold hands. I'm the youngest old man that you know. If your soul intact, let me know. Soulless then closes with its 5th and final part, a sluggish instrumental with light bass and sporadic synths that leaves a listener to ponder Earl's heart-wrenching writing. Again, this is just one of those songs that will fuck you up when you listen to it. I mean, this is as personal and intimate as an artist could ever get about the pains they deal with. And sometimes, hearing how a person is feeling at their darkest and most despairing moments will stick with you for a very long time. Helpless Child is a 15-minute epic by the abrasive American experimental rock band Swans from their 2001 release Soundtracks for the Blind. Originally formed in 1982 by lead singer and multi-instrumentalist Michael Gira, Swans have spent decades creating extensive and intricately heavy bodies of work, often accompanied with nihilistic lyricism over production that can only be described as sonically multi-layered and brutal. On the post-rock opus that is Helpless Child, the band formulates a cinematic yet lethargic soundscape with a musical progression that gradually grows more intense as the song progresses. The track is a delineation of an unborn fetus in the womb of an irresponsible and troubled mother, told from the perspective of the baby, whose gestation is plagued with influences of drugs and alcohol consumption. Michael Gira's candid yet profound songwriting serves as imagery of the fetus suffering while developing under its mother's womb, describing itself being hidden deep inside her crimson pool, while the muddy water runs, an allusion to hazardous fluids resulting from alcohol and drugs surrounding and sickening the baby. The toxicity that the mother is carelessly allowing in her body is suffocating the fetus, who slowly dies while inside the mother's cold, polluted stomach, the dreadful feeling of which is captured by the equally depressive and funereal instrumentation. You won't let me breathe, you won't let me go. Now you'll be the stranger, and I'll be the white-skinned son. You'll blacken my innocence with sugar and opium. The fetus almost views its mother as a complete stranger, this being due to the complete absence of care and nurturing that she has shown while being pregnant, which would have been prevalent in any other mother that genuinely loved their child. At this point, the fetus is now a ghastly pale color, resulting from its mother's frequent use of opium. The fetus will all but inevitably perish from the mother's drug usage, or at the very least suffer severe birth defects, which Gira describes as its innocence being blackened. Throughout the song, a number of analogies are used to describe the disturbed relationship between the mother and the fetus. In this instance, it is children suffocating in a damp, desolate cave. Of course, the cave itself could represent the womb, and the lines are meant to convey the uncomfortableness that the fetus is experiencing from the period of gestation, having a total lack of protection from its own mother slowly asphyxiating the baby with lethal substances. Not only this, but the children being described as suffocating also includes the mother, who is also killing herself by using drugs and is acting childish and inconsiderate for harming her own unborn child in the way that she is. A notable switch from present to past tense is made in the lines, "And you were my mother, and I was the sleeping slave," implying that the fetus has been born and tragically has likely succumbed to the defects resulting from the mother's drug and alcohol use. It's this ultimate miscarriage that makes the line, "Now you be the only child," so harrowing, detailing that because the newborn baby is now dead, the only metaphorical child is the mother, for being the indirect murderer of the fetus. The latter and final half of the track contains an atmospheric and grand instrumental structure, which slowly builds up with more and more instruments in a crescendo of volume until the section abruptly closes and the song ends. It's been said that the final instrumental piece is a musical representation of the short span life of the fetus, first forming in the mother's womb at the start of the build, and gradually growing and suffering as more instruments are added. The production suddenly dies out in the end because so too has the baby, who passes from a miscarriage and is never given a chance to live out its life due to the mother's intoxicating selfishness. The song is largely inspired by Michael Gira's own relationship with his mother, Alice Schultz, who herself was an alcoholic and was notably absent from his youth in the midst of his parents' divorce. Going from incredibly long to incredibly short, Touched is a less than a minute long instrumental track featured on My Bloody Valentine's 1991 shoegaze classic, Loveless. The interlude is a stark contrast from the rest of the rock-influenced project, featuring disorienting strings and timpani sample loops. According to a post on Twitter from drummer Colm O. Silasig, the song, quote, is a story of a sexual encounter. For their writing, the first part is anxiety followed by the release, then the sadness, and the title has another soft meaning. Written in 2 hours with string and timpani samples. There really isn't much else known of the song's meaning, and given its short length, it makes for a pretty brief entry. The intro track from experimental hip-hop group Def Grips' 2015 album The Powers That Be is a heavy-hitting and frenzied song on nihilism with deeply personal songwriting from frontman MC Ride and manic production containing a number of beat switches. Up My Sleeves touches on many intimate topics such as death, deception, anti-foundationalism, and most notably, a concept that Ride has thought of many times throughout his life, yet is still viewed by him as merely a last resort of sorts, hence the title and the phrase frequently repeated throughout the song, Up My Sleeves. The meaning of the saying itself is twisted several times in the track's context, sometimes portraying Ride as a magician with a trick up his sleeves, and other times someone with a secret solution to an otherwise impossible scenario, like a brilliant play in a card game. For the most part though, I believe the track explores the grim possibility of having to resort to the forbidden action that is, and the desperateness that may come along with denying this reality. This is further suggested in the many lines where Ride focuses on his death, detailing how he feels as if there would be little change from his current existence to his post-suicide state, and ultimately revealing that he wishes to die on his own terms, and if it means having to take his own life, he will commit to doing so by any means necessary. Ride is so vocal about this fate on the song because he believes that his life was destined to end this way. Later in the track, the rapper starts questioning his own knowledge of the world around him, wondering just how much of an impact he's made, and if he ever truly lived a life beyond surface reality. Ride feels that when it's all said and done, his existence and identity may remain largely unknown in the eyes of society, as hinted at in the lines, "If I'm so necessary, blank blank obituary, at Broadway Cemetery, at Broadway Cemetery." Ride, referring to Broadway Cemetery in particular, goes along with the theme of being forgotten, as the cemetery's Masonic lawn section is filled with unmarked graves, further alluding to Ride's belief that he too will end up as unidentifiable like all the graves within this section. The third verse on the track is one of Ride's most personal, which includes a line that mourns the loss of his mother and how he has a general lack of understanding surrounding life and his purpose in the world. This existential dread has caused for Ride to slowly lose control of his own life, but although he may have no say on his being, he can still control his own fate, and vows to do so without any fear of death. Ride no longer has a care for what happens to him during his years alive, because no matter what happens, he will still have control over his own outcome. As the Latin phrase memento mori goes, remember, you must die. And that is tier 2 of the iceberg. Every song starting from here is going to be a bit less well known by more mainstream audiences, so stay attentive because although these tracks are eccentric compared to the rest, they are equally as meaningful. Giles Corey is the name of a musical project by American musician Dan Barrett, one of his several solo aliases outside of his work as a member of Have a Nice Life, which we also covered in an earlier entry. The song comes off of the pseudonym self-titled record released in March of 2011, which came as a result of Barrett suffering from a severe depression and heavy thoughts. As does the rest of the album, No One Is Ever Going to Want Me thoroughly explores this depressive state, providing vivid and despairing songwriting over an incredibly woeful instrumental. Barrett begins the song by noting his self-destructive behavior, even describing himself as animalistic. Because he lives with such a negative mindset, he perceives the world around him as savage and threatening, and thus attacks anything and everything in his life, even if doing so is not necessary. The chorus of the song mentions the Bridge of Sighs, an enclosed bridge connecting to a prison in Venice, Italy, that has earned its name from the sighs criminals will let out as they view their final glimpse of the gorgeous city before being sent to jail. This may serve as an allusion to severe depression. The narrator and the listener, likely both suffering from the same pains, walk wistfully across a bridge that leads into a dark period of their lives, taking one last look at a time when everything was perfect, before they begin living in an abiding state of dread. Barrett continues comparing his depression in the final 2 lines of the chorus. It's like a birth, but it is in reverse. Never gets better, always gets worse. The lyricism here highlights the feeling of hopelessness that one with depression may endure, and as stated, this hopelessness has caused for Barrett to contemplate on many occasions, which accounts for the birth in reverse line and the fall through the floor echoes, a ghastly depiction of Barrett himself. The song closes with a more upbeat tempo as Barrett yells out his existential wishes. I want to feel like I feel when I'm asleep. I want to feel like I feel when I am asleep. This describes a symptom of depression known as hypersomnia, which is defined as a state of excessive sleepiness. Those suffering from depression tend to sleep more often and longer than most because it acts as an extensive and numbing escape from the stresses of life, which is something that Barrett himself clearly longs for during this bleak period of time. Much like Deaf Consciousness, the Giles Corey project also includes its own fictional 150-page booklet that further covers the themes of the record through a breakdown of depression and ideation. Also, going off topic, I always love a good Smiths reference. The highly chaotic and disconcerting Girl with Basket of Fruits is the intro track to the 2019 album of the same name by experimental group Shoo Shoo. Featuring yelled vocals, grotesque lyricism, and an outright terrifying instrumental, the song provokes a feeling of immense discomfort as it describes the traumatic rape and assault of an innocent girl. The lyrics on here are vivid to the point where just paying attention may make you feel sick inside. They speak of a girl whose innocence was stolen from her, violently stripped of her purity following an attack by disturbed men preying on the innocent. The title of the song and album is, of course, a reference to a painting by Italian artist Caravaggio known as Boy with a Basket of Fruits, depicting a young man posing saintly with a plentiful basket of fruit. In the album's context, the purity of the boy in the painting has been changed to that of a girl instead, which is meant to highlight the impairment or harm inflicted upon them during their lives by the rest of society, as stated by lead singer Jamie Stewart. When this title is a boy, it is fey and lovely. When it is a girl, it is worrisome and rife with danger. Female martyrs are almost always depicted having their skin flayed, breasts branded or ripped off with tongs, or being stabbed, and they are always alone save for their murderers. This foul imagery is present all throughout the song, and Stewart's screaming vocals only further add to truly showing the horrors this girl is facing at the hands of her attackers, who show absolutely no remorse for her pain. The song notably mentions the life promiser in the second verse. Also known as Vetus, or the Tempter of the Holy, the life promiser is a demon who plays as the male character of the song and whose infamous sigil is also displayed on the album's cover art. Vetus is the man who has been torturing this innocent girl, sickeningly laughing at her agony like the sadist that he is known for being. One ability that Vetus the demon is said to have is the power to possess someone's body and control them to murder or commit. And within the song, it is implied that Vetus has done just that to the girl. Obviously, the demon is entirely unwelcomed by the girl, and at this point would rather commit suicide by stabbing herself with a cutlass than continue living with a monster inside her body. When the life promiser makes her say any word, it comes out as a joke. He is not a good guest. The cutlass is a more excellent guest. Cutlass, 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 cutlass. The horrific evocations continue into the third verse, detailing the girl in an indescribable state of pain while she now suffocates in her own tears, like a fish laying on land, unable to breathe out of its gills. This nauseating and traumatic experience of has caused for the girl to go insane, even being depicted dancing with nobody as she loses all sense of her reality. It's in this latter half of the song where much more phallic imagery is used, such as in the lines, "Eating gherkins by the fistful, from the jar in his front pants pockets, brine and peppers building up, on the rings around his fingers." Gherkins being another name for pickled cucumbers, it's clear that the lyrics are making an allusion to a male genitalia while simultaneously describing a man non-consensually inserting himself into the girl. The incident has traumatized the girl so severely that she even grows paranoid when being near anything that appears phallic. The girl can no longer sleep, as sinister images of her being continue to haunt her day and night, as if they were, as the lyrics so grossly put it, a flock of erect dicks on bat wings. Her abuser has taken away any and all of her emotion and joy, unable to look at anything in life the same way, even something as simple as the blue sky. The girl's entire life has been stained with trauma, and she wishes to be executed in the style of a witch trial just so that she can escape from her existential pains. At the witch execution, they all hope to be called up. They've had enough. They've had enough. The intro to the acclaimed 2017 indie folk album A Crow Looked at Me. Real Death is the instant tone setter that introduces the project's introspective themes of death and utter heartbreak. For those unfamiliar with A Crow Looked at Me or its context, the album was created following the passing of songwriter Phil Elverum's wife, Genevieve Castore, who tragically succumbed to inoperable pancreatic cancer. Each song almost serves as a raw and unfiltered diary entry dedicated to Phil's late wife, with him having recorded the entire project in the very room she died in, with her own instruments, writing lyrics on her own paper. A Crow Looked at Me is very much a heart-aching testament to death, offering the depressive perspective of a man who had just lost the love of his life, and with this loss, his entire world, while still trying to process and fully digest her death and somehow move on in life without her. From the moment the album begins with real death, it becomes immediately clear to the listener that this will be a very painful listen. Not in any derogatory sense or because it's so disturbing, but because of the project's real, saddening content and the devastation of Phil's songwriting and overarching messages. The opening line, "Death is real," arguably summarizes the entire premise of the album, done so perfectly that it was considered by Phil to be its initial title. Death is a subject that Phil has sang about in many of his works, both as Mount Erie and as the Microphones. And while in those instances it may have offered meaningful introspection of the feelings that come with death or death as an experience, none of that can possibly compare to what Phil's dealing with in the present moment. Phil losing his wife has devastated him on a level that his past poetry could never scratch the surface of. It's a loss so impactful that it's caused for him to feel, quote, fundamentally disconnected from everything he wrote before. As the song indirectly notes, it's one thing to simply write about death or associate it with a string of words, but to really, truly experience it the way he has can be an indescribable agony. Phil vividly describes the grief he has endured following his wife's death, telling how every time he walks into her now cold, empty room, his entire body just collapses. His brain shuts off, his knees fail, and he's physically unable to even describe the pain he feels in words as tears fill his eyes. Still, as unnatural as it may feel to those dealing with a loss, the world still carries on. And in Phil's case, he understands that Genevieve would want him and her family to live on without her, and feels as if she's still looking after him from the heavens. This idea of moving forward can be connected to a poem by Joan Kiger titled Night Palace, that is also the small sheet of paper that Phil's holding in the album cover art. The best thing about the past is that it's over. When you die, you wake up from the dream that's your life. Then you grow up and get to be post-human, in a past that keeps happening ahead of you. As Phil has stated in an interview, it was this very poem that Genevieve had pinned above her drawing desk for many years. It was unknown to Phil why exactly she had it pinned, and he never took the time to ask her or truly focus on its meaning until after she passed. When Phil finally did though, he remarkably realized that the poem's meaning matched up perfectly with what he had been covering on A Crow Looked at Me. And then when I was cleaning out her studio, I focused on it and it was just like exactly the record I had just made. Towards the end of the song, Phil acknowledges how hard his wife fought against her terminal cancer, explaining it in a way that makes her death all the more heartbreaking and dreadful. As much effort as she put into beating this illness, Phil sorrowfully recognizes that Genevieve herself must have known that her death was slowly becoming inevitable. Now in the present, Phil is miserable. He doesn't hide his grief or heartbreak behind any ambiguous metaphors, but instead expresses it directly, in a way that likely exceeds any of those things in terms of unfilteredness and substance. Phil understands that he will have to move forward, that all he can do now is learn from her loss and his mourning, and raise his daughter in a future without the involvement of his late wife. But right now, he doesn't want to, because he loves his wife so much that he never imagined living a life without her, because it was something he never even considered. This record is just me trying to be, well, I wasn't even trying. It's just where my head is now. I want things to be meaningful. The fly that is buzzing around on the album in the room where she died, I want that to be a symbol, but I know it's not. Like you're saying, you're embarrassed about it. It's this complicated back and forth about knowing that you are thirsty for meaning. It's not poetic. And so that's what I meant by all poetry is dumb. Profound thoughts and profound experiences get revealed to be tricks that we play on ourselves. And poetry gets revealed to be just like some dumb words that somebody put in an interesting order. All the books on my shelves, when I would go to them to look for help with my anguish, they all just seem so crass. They didn't get it. Those books don't understand. Nobody understands. The universe. Nobody understands my agony or my questioning. And it's this shift in what in the world around us could possibly be meaningful or helpful. It's like a closing down of openness. I become less receptive to help and inspiration. This is really and truly one of the hardest listens on the list for me. Just heartbreaking in the most soul-crushing way imaginable. My Sweet Prince is an eerie song by British alt-rock band Placebo that follows lead singer Brian Mokel's addiction to personifying his dalliance with the drug as if it was a romantic relationship. Over a slow and bleak instrumental, Moko sings about falling for the false charm that is, and its grim side effects. He describes his relationship with the drug in a very passionate manner, always being left in a cold yet intense sweat after using it, as if it was a relationship with a real person where both parties start sweating around each other out of a strong intimacy between the two. Although Moko may know that it's harming him, he still adores the feeling of getting high and uses it to chase away the pains of his existence, some of which could have been caused from a fallout in a real-life relationship. As a matter of fact, Moko himself has stated in a 1999 interview that My Sweet Prince was largely inspired by a relationship that, quote, ended in a true tragedy. It was essentially a love affair between Moko and a female friend that lasted for a period of time until things eventually fell through. In a statement from bandmate Stefan Osdal, the girl had written My Sweet Prince on Moko's bathroom mirror as a final message to him before she left for good. The bittersweet goodbye stuck with Moko since, and it later resulted in him titling the song as such and dedicating it to both his relationship with her and with drugs, which likely did have an influence on the two's love affair. On the song, Moko further illustrates the pain of quitting for good as being similar to that of losing a dear friend, forcing yourself to distance from something that you truly loved. Towards the end, Moko makes an allusion to overdosing, his brain having been intoxicated beyond repair as he finally reaches the ultimate high. His death marks the metaphorical split in the relationship between him and similarly to something real, he feels heartbroken and betrayed after learning that using drugs was never the true long-term solution to living a life without pain. This is a song from the legendary gothic rock band Bauhaus that deals with a paranoia surrounding mass surveillance. It's no secret that in recent years, as well as during the 80s in the midst of the heavily intense Cold War, government bodies have used several forms of surveillance to monitor and follow other entities for various reasons, whether it be undercover spies observing an enemy, hidden cameras or drones capturing highly classified footage, or, in a more dystopian tone, higher-ups secretly watching over and controlling society, all without anyone ever knowing it. The idea of your every move being watched by an unknown person secretly conspiring against you has been a fear of many for decades, and The Spy in the Cab seems to dive into the psyche of a person dealing with this inescapable paranoia, feeling as if everywhere they go, they are entirely surrounded by various technologies or people all sinisterly stalking their movements. What makes the fear all the more unnerving is the sheer unknownness of it all. As far as you know, anyone near you could be a spy with ill intentions, and just how long they have been observing you is equally as much of an enigma. It's been said that this track was largely inspired by espionage that took place during the Cold War, a technique frequently used by governments as a means to gain insider knowledge over enemy technology, defenses, and secret plans. The second song by Shushu on this list, Sad Pony Gorilla Girl, is the opening track to the band's 2002 record, A Promise, that is based on a real-life lesbian relationship between a young girl and an older woman who both lived in an apartment above Jamie Stewart's home during the early days of the group. In an interview, Stewart describes the relationship between the two as being entirely secretive, with the older woman having already been married to an unnamed man. We lived in this house that was literally falling apart. Attached to the house was an apartment that was right above my bedroom window, and there was this young girl who lived in an apartment next door. She was gay and was dating an older woman from the neighborhood, and I think the older woman was married to a man. Their relationship was completely secretive, and they sit above my window and be a couple, but they didn't know I was there. Stewart further details how he viewed the couple's relationship from a distance, realizing from his observations that it was unlikely for the two to ever stay together long-term due to their significant differences and, of course, one of them already being in a marriage, even if they desperately wanted things to work out. Most of the lines from the song are things they had said to each other, and it's an observation of their impossible attempt to have a relationship, their difficult existence. At the time it was very specific, but now to me it's probably just about difficult existence in a more personal or general way, depending on what year it is, what happens to be going on. On the track, Stewart sings from the perspective of the younger, more inexperienced girl in the relationship, who tries to make sense of her partner's negligent behavior towards her while still expressing the love she has for them. On some lines, it's clear that the other person wishes for their relationship to remain private, likely because if word did get out of the couple's love affair, it would destroy their already established relationship that even includes children and a family. Still though, the girl longs to go against these requests and show the love she has for them to the rest of the world. either not fully comprehending or ignoring the magnitude of her partner's situation. To be fair, this shouldn't be something that the girl needs to worry about, but because of the significant age difference, she feels inclined to obey her partner's demands, even if in her heart she is hesitant. Sad Pony Gorilla Girl is a reworked version of a song by a band that Stewart was previously part of, known as 10 in the Swear Jar, a personal favorite of his that he didn't want to go to waste after gaining little traction. Unlike its earlier release though, the song saw much more success and is viewed as a cult classic by many fans of experimental music, with the track standing as one of Shoo Shoo's most popular songs to date. Angel was intended to be entirely different from its final version as the menacing opener to trip-hop collective Massive Attack's Mezzanine. The song was initially planned to be a cover of The Clash's Straight to Hell, with founding member Robert Del Naja getting in contact with Jamaica's own Horace Andy to serve as the track's vocalist. However, the group would face a dilemma when Andy later refused to cover the Clash song due to it containing rather vulgar language, more specifically the word hell. Being a devout Rastafarian, Andy felt as if it was unethical to provide vocals to a cover that featured such lyricism, and thus, Massive Attack were left with no other choice but to yet again start from scratch and improvise an entirely new track. It took no more than 4 hours for the collective to recreate the song, during which they had slowed its tempo, removed a sample from the Sex Gang Children, replaced its lyrics with much of Andy's own lines from his song You Are My Angel, and re-envisioned the track's melody. The final result was the sensational, eminently dark Angel, a 6-minute intro featuring deep bass, layers of mesmerizing synths and electric guitar play, and precise percussion backed by Andy's highly emotional vocal delivery. Lyrically, the song depicts a relationship of lust and deception, describing a woman with angelic traits seducing the narrator with her dark beauty while concealing her malicious intentions from within. The narrator is blinded by their love for the woman, being so attracted to her looks and a desire to be in a relationship with her that they're unable to realize how the longer they're near her, the closer she is to truly neutralizing and killing them from the inside. Machine is the morbid second track from American death metal band Def's fourth studio album Human, released in October of 1991. Thematically and structurally, Human is a notable departure from the band's previous works, with the project focusing on much more philosophical topics such as humanity, mental health, and as opposed to shock value off of horror or grotesque songwriting, while also featuring much more complex song structures than anything previously seen in the band's discography. On Machine, Def implement their signature heavy style on a track that speaks of a society plagued by oppression, with those in power mercilessly controlling the lives of their victims until they eventually commit out of a desperate desire to end their suffering. The song describes a profound hopelessness in the victims of this tyranny, as they have no way of speaking out against the harm being done to them and are left with no other choice but to simply endure their torturing existence, controlling their lives, deciding when and how they will die, a victim of someone else's choice. The ones who suffer have no voice. This lifelong pain comes from never-ending manipulation at the hands of authorities, who aim to make their victims feel cold and isolated from the rest of the world. No matter how much someone asks for help through their hardships or who they come to for support, there will never be anyone who can save them from this hell, and the torment is inescapable. In this dystopia, society is robbed of all things nourishing, and can only truly be free of such horrible agony in death. How easy it is to deny the pain of someone else's suffering. Machine is best characterized by ruthless instrumentation, Chuck Schuldiner's ear-splitting vocals, and most notably, storytelling with zero hints of a happy ending. This is a very off-putting track from the Japanese avant-garde metal outfit Duran Grey, released as part of their single Glass Skin in 2008. From the start, the song attempts to make the listener equally as uncomfortable as its revolting title suggests, dramatically opening with haunting piano arpeggios, backed by chaotic, deafening screams that are present all throughout its 3-minute duration. Between the frantic shrieking lies lyricism containing pure hatred for all of society, the narrator emphasizing on the annoyance they experience when around others and a desire to ruthlessly harm them all. The song also calls out the moral hypocrisy amongst many members of society, particularly those who engage in celebrity culture as well as celebrities themselves. I'm gonna slash your wound just like mine. I can't hear the voices of society anymore. I don't understand. You're all fine hypocrites. I want to shout out to all the trash celebrity stars. I'll your daughter on your grave. That line specifically is by far the most notable and abhorrent of the entire song, and it does a pretty good job at expressing the general remorselessness and hellish tone that Dorian Gray puts on full display. Oh boy, this song. This song is 6 minutes and 42 seconds of what can only be described as audio chaos. The 1996 instrumental piece by Japanese musician and noise veteran Merzbow is considered disturbing not for any tragic deeper meaning or morbid storytelling, but for the sheer harshness of static and distortion that encompasses this entire song. The track is so disorderly in composure, so loud and incredibly confrontational, that it's grown to become iconic amongst the small yet passionate fan base of Merzbow that appreciate the song simply for being such an insanely hard listen. Trying to describe how sonically brutal Woodpecker No. 1 is in words is honestly easier said than done. So I just figured, why not play a small snippet for those unfamiliar? Headphone listeners, you've been warned. Yeah, I think those few seconds of the song explain things better than I probably ever could in an iceberg video. Speaking of iceberg though, this entry concludes the third tier of the iceberg. Let's move on to the fourth, where things start to get really obscure. Threnody to the Victims of Hiroshima is an eerie 9-minute score composed by Polish conductor, composer, and Grammy Award-winning musician Krzysztof Penderecki. Written in 1960 and premiered in 1961, the avant-garde composition includes an orchestra of 52 string instruments, 24 violins, 10 violas, 10 cellos, and 8 double basses, all played in various different unconventional techniques that further assist in establishing the track's eldritch yet novel song structure, such as on the tailpiece of a violin or from behind its bridge, typically deemed as the wrong side. It was this anguished and deeply unsettling piece that truly defied traditional orchestral styles and techniques for its time, featuring unusual harmonic language, eccentric dynamics and texture, and of course, masterful composing that makes for an incredibly uncanny listening experience. The piece was initially titled 837, simply after its written length. However, when Penderecki heard an orchestral performance of the piece for the first time, he was, quote, struck by the emotional charge of the work, and later made the decision to dedicate the brooding requiem to the Japanese residents who were killed during the fatal atomic bombing of Hiroshima during World War II, aptly renaming the piece as such. Many critics have described the Threnody as perfectly capturing the horrors that the victims endured during their final moments alive on the fateful August day in 1945. And if you ever listen for yourself, you will know this to be true in the strongest sense. Penderecki's disturbing Threnody would age to become his most famous work, catapulting the composer to international fame, as well as earning him the UNESCO award the same year it was released. The piece has also been featured in various iconic medias, including in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, and in the third season of Mark Frost and David Lynch's TV series Twin Peaks. I hate that I can't say this band's name without the risk of getting demonetized by YouTube, but I'll try my best to still sound coherent while giving them their rightful recognition. Frankie Teardrop is a 10-minute track for the American electropunk duo of vocalist Alan Vega and keyboardist Martin Rev, featured on their self-titled project released in 1977. Although they never truly saw mainstream success, the duo were an incredibly influential outfit from the underground synth-pop scene, and their unorthodox style can still be found in the works of later and larger 80s groups such as Soft Cell and Erasure. Not only is their sound very recognizable, but they were among the first of their time to include vividly twisted and grisly subject matter in their songs, Frankie Teardrop being by far the most prominent example, paving the way for many other more popular artists to take a more abhorrent turn in their music without receiving as much public backlash. As previously mentioned, many of the dark songs that music enthusiasts are all too familiar with today are indebted to Frankie Teardrop, the barren yet upfront track that tells a sinister story. Only featuring Vega's manic vocals and a spacious drum machine, the song follows a 20-year-old man named Frankie who spends his days working at a factory. Frankie works a 7 to 5 shift each day, doing what he can to make ends meet while providing for his wife and newborn child back at home, similarly to just about any other average American man. However, the stresses of Frankie's job and dullness of his day-to-day life has begun taking a toll on his mental health. We later learn that Frankie is struggling to sustain himself, as he's unable to make enough money to live, unable to even buy enough food, and worst of all, is being evicted, alongside his family, for failing to pay his bills. Frankie's lack of self-sufficiency causes him to grow desperate, losing his touch of reality as he sees his entire world collapsing before him. Seemingly all out of options and driven to insanity, Frankie then does the unthinkable. Frankie's so desperate. He's gonna kill his wife and kid. Frankie's gonna kill his kid. Through Vega's narration, we later learn that Frankie has developed a vile desire to murder both his wife and child. Later on, he picks up a gun, points it at his asleep 6-month-old child, and pulls the trigger. He brutally does the same to his wife, all while Vega depicts the horrors of the scene through light moans and heinous screams. After committing the horrifying double homicide, Frankie appears to exit the trains of madness he was previously in and truly fathom what he had just done to his innocent family. He realizes that he's simply unable to live with himself after the murders, and thus, he puts the gun to his own head and commits. After several more minutes of instrumentation and Vega's vocalizations, said to represent Frankie's own mannerisms of anger and insanity, the song closes with a grim yet unmistakable final message. We're all Frankies. We're all lying in hell. Vega has stated that Frankie Teardrop was based on a real-world story he read about in a newspaper, and as gruesome as it is, the lyricism of the song does present a terrifyingly realistic story. Of course, the overarching essence of these lines is the affliction of an average life. Just about all of us have lived or are living a life similar to Frankie's, a typical, uneventful, work-heavy, and admittedly dull life. And it wouldn't be entirely ridiculous to say that, at times, we grow tired of having to deal with it all. For some, this dread can serve as a motivation to make changes for the better, to work out of this lackluster lifestyle and into a more prosperous and rewarding existence. But for others, with life stresses piling up more and more as the days pass, existing may seem like an inescapable cycle of torture that could turn even the most regular person you know into an outright lunatic. And as a result of this downfall, they may end up committing acts equally as dismaying as what Frankie did. As previously stated, many critics have regarded Frankie Teardrop as an incredibly impactful musical piece, and the Rolling Stone magazine has even dubbed the track as, quote, the most terrifying ever. The highly charismatic Dead Joe is a song by early 80s post-punk band The Birthday Party, fronted by the renowned Australian songwriter Nick Cave, and notorious for their noisy and dark soundscapes that challenged established norms of the punk genre. Cave's vision for this track, featured on their 1982 release Junkyard, involved creating a bleak scenario masked as a lively or sportive spectacle, this being the car smash mentioned in the lyrics. Sonically, the song is very fast-paced and features a distorted guitar and drums over Cave's boisterous yelling, who uses playful onomatopoeia and vocalizations to add to the adrenaline of the instrumental. He repeatedly sings of an event known as the car smash, which given the track's context, is likely just a more spirited term for a fatal car accident. This is supported by a very specific, grim set of lines that can be heard towards the end of the song. Welcome to the car smash, welcome to the car crash. You can't tell the girls from the boys anymore. You can't tell the girls from the boys anymore. These lines, of course, refer to the gruesome aftermath of an automobile collision, one so devastating that identifying the victims of the wreck is impossible due to how mutilated and disfigured their corpses have become. As humorous as the track sounds, this is undoubtedly terrifying imagery that makes the listening experience a bit more disturbing than that of your typical punk song. This is actually a deeply relaxing and alluring jazz instrumental from German noir jazz band Bohren and der Club of Gore. Founded in 1992 by drummer Thorsten Benning, keyboardist Morten Gass, guitarist Rainer Hensleit, and bassist Robin Roldenberg. The track is featured on their 2016 album Black Earth, and is a 7-minute ambient piece featuring a somber piano, slow bass, and even a serene flute that comes in towards its latter half, all while rather ominous melody quietly lingers over the entire instrumental. Being completely honest, this was a complete contrast to what I was expecting to hear out of the song given the project's dooming cover art and the metal-esque name of the band themselves. But it was very much a pleasant surprise from a musical outfit that I hadn't previously heard of before. Make no mistake though, Bohren and their Club of Gore significantly differ from the rest of their counterparts, as they have described their crossover fusion of jazz and ambient music as, quote, an unholy ambient mixture of slow jazz ballads, Black Sabbath doom, and down-tuned autopsy sounds. I recommend listening to this song if you haven't. It's actually by far one of the less disturbing entries on this list, so you won't have to worry about feeling uncomfortable like many of the other tracks here if you do. And right back into the disturbingness we go. Featuring no instrumental and demonical screeches and screams, Wild Woman with Steak Knives is a 12-minute track from avant-garde musician Diamanda Galas, who was born in San Diego, California, and is known for her sorrowing vocal range that can reach up to as high as 4 octaves. Galas, who puts her fiendish vocal abilities on full display within the track, had notably been discouraged to sing by her Greek Orthodox parents, but this didn't stop her from taking part in a series of operas and performance art solo pieces in her youth, and later releasing her own provocative yet compelling work in the 80s, with her debut LP The Litanies of Satan dropping in 1982, of which includes this incredibly disturbed song. In the words of the album liner notes, The Litanies of Satan devotes itself to the emeraldine perversity of the life struggle in hell, and Wild Woman with Steak Knives in particular is, quote, a cold examination of unrepentant monomania, the devoration instinct for which the naive notion of filial mercy will only cock a vestigial grin. Yeah, this shit is heavy. The lyrics speak of grotesque savagery and devilish symbolism, while Galas herself utilizes blood-curdling shrieks, screams, moans, and wails to further build onto the sinister uncanniness of the entire piece. On Hello Skinny, the art rock band known as The Residents, notorious for their extensive catalog and anonymous identities, tell a witty yet discomforting story involving the manufacturing of crack. The band explores this concept through personifying the drug itself, naming a meth crystal Skinny, who is referred to both as a drug and later on a drug dealer, and describing Skinny's birth in the beginning of the song. Skinny was born in a bathtub and grew so incredibly thin that even the end of an eyedropper sucked him in. Skinny never knew any questions and Skinny never looked at lights, but Skinny sold something every single night. The first half of the track paints Skinny as a crack rock, having been brewed from a bathtub and turning out so thin that he was able to fit inside a tiny eyedropper. However, the last line of the first verse changes the personification of Skinny from a drug to a dealer, which perfectly segues into the song's second verse that sees Skinny the drug dealer providing crack to the narrator, which has in turn led to detrimental consequences. Skinny sold a soldier to me, Skinny sold a wife, Skinny sold a suction cup and a knife. Of course, a suction cup and a knife are two tools often used to consume crack itself, but the first line involving Skinny selling a soldier and a wife does stand out for an even more grim reason. The line follows through with the personification of Skinny being a drug dealer who sells crack, but simultaneously upholds its symbolism as the drug itself. And thus, Skinny selling a soldier and a wife to the narrator implies that the narrator's damaging crack addiction has resulted in both his wife and a close relative, who happens to be a soldier, exiting out of his life out of a displeasure for his drug usage. Released all the way back in 1978, Hello Skinny is a song that features frisky storytelling but with an undertone that is both deeply personal and morbid. An enthralling musical approach that has been prevalent in many other tracks by the Residents, released over the course of their half-a-century-long existence as an avant-garde art collective. Rosemary's Baby is an impressive metal cover of the musical composition Sleep Safe and Warm from the 1968 psychological horror film Rosemary's Baby, performed by the heavy metal supergroup of Fantomas, consisting of Faith No More's Mike Patton, Slayer's Dave Lombardo, Melvins' Buzz Osborne, and Mr. Bungle's Trevor Dunn. The original piece was a lullaby, first written by Polish film music composer Krzysztof Komida and sung by Mia Farrow, which served as the main theme of Rosemary's Baby's score and received critical acclaim following its release as a single. Fantomas' rendition of the piece is one of hundreds done over the course of several decades, primarily by jazz and avant-garde artists, as the song is widely viewed as a jazz standard. However, Fantomas' cover undoubtedly stands out from the rest, not only because it's a heavy metal version of an otherwise gentle and soothing lullaby, but also because it turns the piece's inherent innocence and lulling ability into something much more aggressive and terrifying than what had originally been envisioned, adding a previously unfamiliar sense of horror to the song's naturing essence. The track features incredibly creepy singing from Patton, whose eerie, childlike vocals are backed by pounding drums, intensely dark electric guitar play, and witty yet sinister jingles quietly ringing in the background. Sounding like something straight out of a children's horror movie, the song is sure to traumatize any oblivious youngling and evoke a strong sense of unease on listeners unfamiliar with its captivating context. Rosemary's Baby was released in 2001 as part of the band's second studio album, The Director's Cut, a versatile collection of cover tracks of several different horror movie and TV show themes featuring a wide range of genres such as thrash metal, grunge, jazz, and even electronica. This is a 22-minute spoken word track from British neo-folk outfit Current 93, with lyrics written by the famed American horror writer Thomas Ligotti and spoken by its sole member David Tibet. On the song, Tibet speaks over a cold, circuiting instrumental, his vocals desolate and almost robotic in tone, as he delivers a total of 13 verses that feature references from several of Ligotti's occult writings. Over a soundscape of harrowing drones, Tibet brings Ligotti's lines to life in the form of disturbed, monotone mutterings, of which layer intricate doctrines and storytelling that just one iceberg entry likely couldn't do justice. It's within these many stanzas that Tibet touches on various concepts including societal collapse, monism, and the Aristotelian concept of substance, while even referencing a tale written by Ligotti in 1989 known as The Frolic, which follows a series of conversations between a prison psychiatrist and a deranged child murderer. A Special Plan is essentially sonic madness, a track of intuitive lunacy that tells of the world, or the universe for that matter, as a realm of illusion. The mind, intellect, ego, all made up in a way equivalent to that of a dream. All philosophies aside, the sole question that is persistent throughout the entire poem is what exactly does the special plan for this world that the track title speaks of entail? And to answer plainly, it is likely, as the final stanza depicts a situation where all hope is lost, where all your loved ones have vanished from your life, where you are completely alone with your deranged thoughts, where you have no goals to achieve, and thus no true purpose to live. In an existence as utterly miserable as this, what other option would you have but to carry out your own special plan? When everyone you have ever loved is finally gone, when everything you have ever wanted is finally done with, when all of your nightmares are for a time obscured, as by a shining brainless beacon, or a blinding eclipse of the many terrible shapes of this world, when you are calm and joyful, and finally entirely alone. Then in the great new darkness, you will finally execute your special plan. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of those songs that has so much depth and so much to cover that it would take far too long to explain within just one entry. I do recommend researching this track yourself though, as a lot of its meanings are terrifyingly perplexing and equally substantial. Think of this summary as a mere introduction into something much, much deeper. The amusingly titled Sex Jam 2 Insect Incest is a song from the American indie rock band Milemaker, consisting of Al Birian, Sean Husick, Dave Lanley, Noah Leger, and Roby Newton. Featured on their 2000 release Frigid Form Cell, the track is essentially an insectile love song that utilizes the band's eclectic sound of heavy drums and energetic vocals to create a dynamic 3-minute piece. Sexually driven with lyricism that takes life in the form of a romantic relationship involving bugs of all things. You could bring home the pollen, I could be the queen bee. The way the mammals do it is inefficient and unsanitary. You've gotta whisper to me, make sure that I'm not dead. You've gotta take your tweezers and pry apart my little legs. I wish I could peel away your humid human skin and attach you to me parasitically. To me, there's no denying this track's creativity from a songwriting perspective. The analogy of insects mating makes for some very provocative but riveting imagery, while still taking a jab at typical human, or I guess mammal relationships that are painted to be nowhere near as unique or fulfilling as what's being described within the lyrics. Add in a post-hardcore instrumental that some might find equally as arousing, and you have certainly one of the more underrated entries on this iceberg. I Don't Want to Have Easy Listening Nightmares is a hidden track from the English-based outfit Nurse with Wound, formed by Steve Stapleton, John Fothergill, and Heman Patak. Since debuting nearly half a century ago in 1978, Nurse with Wound have put together an extensive catalog spanning roughly 200 individual releases, a majority of which include themes of absurdist horror and bizarre satire, as well as influences of free jazz and industrial music. Easy Listening Nightmare in particular comes from a 3-song project titled Alice the Goon, a limited EP that was exclusively sold by the group's music label White Noise during the Festival Musiques Ultimes in Nouvelle, France. The project and its tracks were only purchasable on May 13th and 14th of 1995, and thus have largely fallen into obscurity in the coming decades, as none of them are currently available on streaming services. The intro song to this rare EP is an appropriate tone setter for what's to come from Nurse with Wound, opening with a snappy industrial loop as a number of distorted sounds clash aggressively with each other as the instrumental progresses. These noises continue to linger and grow harsher in volume throughout the 9-minute piece, tending to cause the listener to feel a heavy dizziness from every loud buzz and freakish shriek. Viewing this track as the audio equivalent of a bad trip may be putting it lightly, but it ultimately concludes when the buzzes abruptly end and the loop gradually fades away. And that'll do it for tier 4. On to the 5th tier. Written by the early English anarcho-punk band known as Crass, notorious for their politically driven tracks and themes surrounding anarchism, Nagasaki Nightmare is a song that uses morbid imagery to tell the horrifying tale of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945, detonated by the US over tens of thousands of Japanese civilians. The track vividly describes the nuclear hellfire that rained down over the city, devastating all nearby land and leading to between 60 and 80,000 casualties, of which included innocent men, women, and children. Lead singer Steve Ignorate's vocals can be described as incredibly jittery and uneasy, almost intentionally evoking a sense of discomfort as he sings of the nightmare scenario that residents of Nagasaki endured on that fateful day, only making the track even more tormenting than it already is. They're always there, high in the skies, pretty as a picture in the general's eyes. They've done it once, they'll do it again. They'll shower us all in their deadly rain. Fishing children fish in the imperial waters. Sons and lovers, lovers and daughters. Cherry blossom hanging on the cherry blossom tree. Flash, blinding flash, then there's nothing to see. The song continues by depicting all of Nagasaki's citizens being brutally murdered by the atomic bomb's unrelenting heat and radiation as an unspeakable darkness engulfs the entire city. This atomic bombing and the aftermath that followed not only resulted in a Japanese surrender and the ultimate end of World War II, but was also an indescribable anguish for the hundreds of thousands of victims who lived through deliberate horrors best captured through Nagasaki Nightmare's grave songwriting. A song featured on their 3-track project of the same name, Animist is a lengthy industrial drone piece from New Zealand outfit Children of the Grayscale Rainbow, an art project consisting of Benjamin Watkins and Carrion Verrain. Its music video, which features footage of large, cloaked figures roaming city streets and sinister religious imagery, accompanies the song's abrasive instrumentation that spans roughly 12 minutes. The track is noisy, very much disorienting, and with what sounds to be a distorted organ layered over harsh strings and black noise, shrouds the listener in a cloud with sounds that can only be described as menacing and ill-omened. Animus itself is defined as the belief in a supernatural power that organizes and animates the material universe. And just from what I could gather after listening to this song, one could infer that this supernatural power in question prominently consists of dark energy. Now, Children of the Grayscale Rainbow are a very, very, very obscure collective, so if you are just now hearing about them, do check out some of their catalog yourself. For an outfit as inconspicuous as they are, their works, including Animist, are certainly compelling to say the least. This was a song released back in 1987 by English singer-songwriter Philip Lithman under his stage name Snakefinger. Lithman, largely known for his work with the aforementioned band of The Residents, recites a poem over an eerie avant-garde instrumental which tells the tale of a man named Sawney Bean. The poem's narrator meets an old man named Jack McTeague, who further elaborates on Sawney Bean and his days as a robber while discreetly living inside of a cave near the Scottish coast. During the year of 1424, McTeague describes Bean and his inbred family searching throughout the Galloway shore for unsuspecting travelers to take advantage of. Upon finding several of them, Bean and his family are depicted robbing the travelers before murdering and later cannibalizing their corpses after death. For they feasted on roasted murdered men, and then their bones they hid. It's later stated that this horrifying act eventually captured the attention of King James VI himself, who sent 400 of his army men to promptly locate and execute Bean. The men soon arrived at Bean's cave to the abhorrent scene of human flesh scattered all over, before then apprehending the wicked cannibal and the rest of his inbreeding family. The women of the family were burned alive at a local public square, while Bean himself and the rest of the other men had their hands and feet severed, with all of them being left to bleed out and die for their actions. Of course, this poem is based off of the Scottish legend of Alexander Bean, who is said to have lived sometime during the 16th century and, with his incest clan of 45 members, cannibalized over 1,000 victims over a span of 25 years. Bean and his clan faced similar executions as those described in the song, and to this day, it's still debated whether or not Bean was merely a mythical figure or a real, heinously gruesome individual. Composed by famed Russian composer Alfred Schnittke in 1979, the Concerto for Piano and Strings is a classical piece considered to be an eccentric opus of its time period. The concerto spans a total of 28 minutes in length, consisting of a single continuous movement with a series of unconventional sections in between. From start to finish, there is incredibly irregular yet pensive instrumentation that highlights the piece's surrealism. It begins silent, with an outre piano lingering in the background, before many note clusters are played in unison with dark and unorthodox strings which enter the piece in dramatic fashion. Even through its many surprises though, the concerto has a number of moments that display beautiful instrumentation and masterful composing, fusing elements of jazz, avant-garde, and classical to create an overall masterpiece of a composition. The Concerto for Piano and Strings was the second of 3 concertos composed by Schnittke, with it later being premiered in Leningrad the same year it was first created. Schnittke's interests in the likes of yoga, Kabbalah, and anthroposophy largely inspired his creative process in the making of the piece, and he is quoted as saying that one of his primary intentions for the work was to create a concerto that both avoided and approached, quote, banality in form and dynamics. To Schnittke, this banality came in the form of the same repeated chords, the typical flow of rhythms, and the predictable excessiveness and drama that always came during a piece's vital moments or in a climax. Composing the average scary, avant-garde piece was considered cliched to the Russian composer, and he instead focused heavily on creating a piece that was multi-layered, instrumentally expansive, and included a musical progression that brings together lush and terrifying in a beautifully discordant way. In the words of fellow composer Jed Disler, even in its most lyrical, expansive moments, there's nothing pretty about Schnittke's Concerto for Piano and String Orchestra, with its seasick microtonal lurches, pounding non-minimalist repetitions, and tortured Baroque allusions. Schnittke's concerto was dedicated to Vladimir Kranev, a Russian pianist whose storied career eventually earned him the title of People's Artist of the USSR. Today, the Concerto for Piano and Strings is one of Schnittke's most acclaimed and performed works. The electronic ballad from Swedish singer-songwriter Guardian Dreyer, released in 2009 under their solo alias of Fever Ray, makes many poignant allusions to both death and existential loneliness, a feeling of being so isolated from the world around you that no one is able to notice you or the emotions you express. Over a cold instrumental and through vocals that are both eccentric and incredibly layered, Dreyer describes a profound emptiness from within and an everlasting desire to show love while being heartless and to sing a gorgeous melody while being voiceless. Some say that the narrator of the track speaks as death itself, while others believe that it is written from the perspective of Dreyer or even an unborn baby, as Dreyer had given birth to their second child during the creating process of this record. There are countless parents who have recounted themselves as being overcome with emotions during the birth of their child, and for the monumental event that it is, they have every right to be. These emotions may be of joy or happiness, having brought new life and purpose not only to the parents of the baby, but to society and the world as a whole. However, it's common for parents to feel nervous during this time as well, since giving birth and raising a child properly can be viewed as an immense task to fulfill, even more so if they feel as if they're unprepared to welcome a child into the world or unfit to be the guardian to walk them through the trials of life. Dreyer themselves is quoted as saying that many songs featured on their self-titled record stem from experiences with depression and anxiety, and much of the lyricism on If I Had a Heart sees the speaker deeply wishing to show signs of affection and shed light on another person's life, but can't due to themselves being shrouded in a dreadful existence. Since its release, If I Had a Heart has been featured on several different pieces of media such as The Following, History's original series Vikings, as well as in Breaking Bad during Jesse Pinkman's go-kart scene. This is a song that comes from the British progressive folk band known as Comus, appearing on their debut record First Utterance, which was released all the way back in 1970. With cover art that was drawn in pen by the band's lead singer Roger Wooden, the album is a unique fusion of folk and psychedelia while also including unmistakable hints of macabre, both within much of the band's off-putting instrumentation and the grave subject matter being touched upon. Drip Drip in particular arguably possesses the most disturbing storytelling and outright devilish themes of all songs included, with some going as far as to say that the track may very well be cursed with an unhallowed energy. Over a sporadic acoustic instrumental, the song's narrator freakishly describes their experience with a female victim. They go into disgusting detail on this woman's deathly state, speaking of how her corpse remains dangling, drenched in blood and wounded from the torture being inflicted upon her, and even how the mere look of her lifeless eyes trouble the narrator, despite having already murdered her. Even the title of Drip Drip evidently comes from the noise being made when drops of the woman's blood land on the ground from her gashed lips. Terrifyingly, the narrator views their victim's corpse with a sort of amusement, imagining her hanging as if it was some gorgeous scene, while further fantasizing about burying and committing on her body. Within an undertone of horror, they depict these revolting acts with imagery of nature and lushness all around, when the scene in reality is a gruesome contrast to what is being portrayed in the twisted mindset of the murderer. In a clearing, where the sunrays dance amongst the forest's dense secrets, you will softly rest, your pale beauty enshrined by the sweet glade, your body at peace. Even the earth will fill the crack where entered my blade. Having grown impatient with viewing the victim's naked corpse from a distance, the narrator makes the decision to cut her out for and follow through with previously mentioned, considering this as a last physical communion, and even swearing that they'll, quote, be gentle when touching her body. Simply put, Drip Drip is one of those tracks that will horrify you if you pay close attention to the songwriting. And this is a song that's over 10 minutes long, full of uncanny yet astounding vocal performances, and obviously brutal lyrical material. So once it ruthlessly places its foot over the throat of an oblivious listener, it never lets off. The influential thrash metal outfit of Morbid Saint made undoubtedly one of their most abrasive tracks in Assassin, released in 1989 as part of their debut album Spectrum of Death. This 7-minute long song features overly electric riffs, brutal vocal performances from lead vocalist Pat Lind, and lyrics that speak from the perspective of a heartless killer, whose sole purpose in life is to mercilessly murder their victims as part of a premeditated hit. This assassin views their victims as nothing more than just configurations of flesh and bones, unable to comprehend the pain that they bring upon them or even attach any sort of identity to their existence, likely due to the assassin themselves having an existential crisis. It's insinuated later in the track that the hitman is murdered themselves after presumably killing hundreds, having lived a life of pain and fear that came as a result of existing in a reality that included gruesome murders and sadistic torture. You lied to us, and didn't care to explain. And now look at you. You are dead. They can't help you no more. The life's been drained from your soul, through the bullet hole in your head. Now, I personally don't think this song is disturbing at all, but instead has a very, very odd structure with music theory that just makes no sense to the ears. This track, produced by dubstep artist Phonon, made waves in the EDM scene upon its release in the summer of 2020 for its incredibly eccentric rhythm, with some even considering it to be the most unique dubstep song ever for this very reason. Polyrhythm sounds as chaotic and entirely asymmetrical as it does because of its peculiar meter, as it is a blend of the time signatures of 7/4 with 4/4, the latter being the much more traditional rhythm for EDM music. Because of this, the song doesn't follow any sort of consistent musical structure at all, thus making its beat and the accompanying drops next to impossible to correctly predict. With the way polyrhythm completely defies the genre, you can imagine how divisive it became amongst members of the dubstep community. Some met the track with praise, applauding its boundary-pushing structure and appreciating Phonon for the experimentation done on the song, producing a composition that's, while maybe wildly incoherent, still sound full and complete. Then there were some who considered the track to be a total flop, even claiming, and this is how dubstep sounds to non-dubstep listeners, while noting its utilization of such taboo theory as its ultimate flaw, and believing that those who are commending the song for its quirks to be overreacting about a track with a poorly executed concept. Love it or hate it, what remains indisputable about Polyrhythm is that it is a song which completely upended its genre, and with an unpredictable cadence and extremely unconventional theory, made the comfortable uncomfortable and forced its listeners into much needed discussion about EDM's experimental limitations, something one could argue is necessary for just about every other genre out there. Uploaded on June 16th, 2012 under the YouTube channel Treats for Beast was this 1 minute and 36-second video titled Plastic Men. It includes very minimalistic imagery, a plain yet uneasy atmosphere, and most notably some kind of green creature that repeats the music video's 4 lines in a fraught, very high-pitched voice. This creature is a female from a species known as the Seam, and she opens the video laying down and almost curled up as if she was wounded by something. Eerie figures of a man, woman, and child with pitch black eyes and alien-esque hands are then seen approaching the Seam, as the lines "Plastic men, women, and children want to tickle me in the wilderness" are sung. Evidently, these lines allude to particularly in an environment where the victim is most vulnerable and can be easily apprehended by a group of people. The theme also uses the otherwise innocent action of tickling to describe what is being done to her, a way of noting how she may not be at an old enough age to fully comprehend such a situation. They watch as I caress my exposed spine, details how the strangers have already taken advantage of the seam and ripped through her green skin, revealing her spine much to the sick amusement of the predators watching over. The bodies of survivors are violated by the in ways that scar them both physically and emotionally, often leading to the formation of mood disorders, eating disturbances, as well as body dysmorphia. This is highlighted in the music video's final, most simple yet dismaying line of "I'm ashamed of my own body," as the scene feels embarrassed about her body having been exposed in the way that it was, and her being exploited in her most vulnerable state. For some, this is simply another off-putting MS Paint style video, but many online users have praised its deeper meaning of awareness and how, in its own unique way, it accurately encapsulates the mindset and emotional state of survivors such as the Seam. Those who have experienced in particular have found a source of validation within the video. It can be comforting and even calming to find an art piece that tackles the subject as personal as this without being overly noxious and expresses otherwise indescribable emotions of pain and trauma in a way that can easily resonate with thousands, as shown through the video's overwhelmingly supportive comment section. Intended to be a cover of the Cure's standout hit Boys Don't Cry, is a song by the REUPLOAD, a Japanese harsh noise project created by Juntaro Yamanouchi in 1985. There are two versions of this track that can be found today, and both are stark differences from one another. One version, a 3-minute and 47-second mellow post-punk song, is noted by much of Juntaro's cult following as one of his most heartfelt performances for its lo-fi and hazy instrumentation and anguished screams from the man himself. The track is a demo from the making of Juntaro's 1988 EP, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and is known for being a pivotal turn away from the REUPLOAD's traditional extreme noise sound, instead focusing more on atmosphere and eclectic vocalizations. Now, the other version of this song is significantly shorter, less than 25 seconds in length, and in the simplest way to put it, encompasses much of what the REUPLOAD has always been throughout their decade-long history: rapid, brutal, and blistering underground hardcore punk.
Boys, don't cry! What did I
Though being much less longer than its demo counterpart, this version of the song is as chaotic and explosive as just about every other track from Juntaro, and its ability to still provoke so much emotion in such a short amount of time serves as a testament to the brilliance of the REUPLOAD. Again, another song that isn't necessarily as disturbing as it is strangely fascinating. Outer Worlds is a track produced by polychromatic musician and multi-instrumentalist Dolores Catharino in 2020. For those who have yet to have been introduced to the world of polychromatic music, it is essentially based around a system which utilizes the concept of pitch color to create frequencies and rhythmic notations on a micro-pitch scale. This form of microtonal music allows for the exploration of a countless amount of atypical notes and harmonies that would otherwise be impossible to hear on something such as a black and white keyboard, opening up what can only be described as a whole new world of theory. Outer Worlds, along with Catharino's other works, implements this very auditory system using an instrument known as a lumitone keyboard, which lays out all playable scales in spectrum ordering. In 2016, Catharino participated in a TED Talk in which she provided an insightful overview of how these keyboards are meant to be played and perceived. And simply put, she states that as opposed to simply playing a white key C note on a piano, a lumitone keyboard allows for you to play a red key C note, an orange key, a yellow, green, and so on. With this in mind, one can imagine just how much innovational music can be produced from these extraordinary progressions. Up to 106 notes can be fit in just a single octave within polychromatic compositions, a number which provides much more expressive potential in sound than just the usual 12-pitch language. This is exactly what makes Outer Worlds sound like something produced by Martian aliens in the year 3000, using uncharted harmonies and chromatic intervals to produce extraordinarily layered sci-fi pieces. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the concept of polychromatic music became significantly more mainstream within the music industry in the coming years. And if you've been paying close enough attention, you may notice that it has already been implemented within a number of songs as well as in several futuristic film scores of today. I highly recommend checking out Dolores Catherinos' work yourself during your free time. Her independent research on microtonal music tells infinitely more valuable information than this iceberg entry ever could. And the best part about all of it is how perfectly everything translates into the music. The Marble Eye is a song by Swedish singer-songwriter Anna von Hauswolf from her 2018 album Dead Magic. Being the only instrumental of the project, it features haunting pipe organs that are played all throughout its 5-minute duration, and melodies drawing heavily from influences of Gothic and dark neoclassical music. The track is noted for its hypnotizing background droning, dramatic crescendos, and intense organ play, and sinisterly gorgeous harmonies that, when all put together for one grandiose song, feels like the pitch-perfect score to a walk down the massive hallways of a Victorian-era Gothic cathedral. The Marble Eye's funereal ambience truly makes for a soundscape that blends in exceptionally well with the rest of the ritualistic and occult themes of Anna's 2018 release, of which it's included in as an entrancing interlude. There isn't too much else to the song itself aside from the fact that it is absolutely beautiful, in its own harrowing ways of course. Strongly recommend listening to this one yourself as well as the rest of the magic while you're at it. This is a song from the alternative country band 16 Horsepower, founded by songwriter David Eugene Edwards and Pascal Humbert in the midst of building movie sets in Los Angeles in 1992. Neck on the New Blade comes from their debut record Sackcloth and Ashes, released in 1995, and likewise the majority of their catalog consists of religious undertones along with themes surrounding interpersonal conflict and violence. 16 Horsepower were notable in underground scenes for their unique take on country rock and blending the traditional aspects of southern music with shades of dark Americana, and this is as apparent as ever on Neck on the New Blade. David's vocals on the song adds a salient rawness to the overall atmosphere, and through grim imagery and despairing acoustic melodies, makes for a standout track, not only in its aforementioned album, but in the subgenre of Southern Goth in general, at the time being a fairly new genre concept not yet grasped by mainstream audiences. Further releases from 16 Horsepower down the line would see David Eugene Edwards gradually become one of the pioneering figures of Southern Gothic music in the late 90s, with him later continuing these efforts as the frontman of Woven Hand, a small dark Americana scene in Denver, Colorado spawned as a result of David's works, and with this came newfound recognition for the distinctive subgenre, as well as a new generation of Gothic country artists inspired by the beautifully grotesque melodies and the somber subject matter. I Lick My Brain in Silence has a rather uncanny music video which features a single, uncut shot of Japanese electronic artist Kopei singing the track's lyrics with eccentric facial expressions, but other than that, there really isn't much inherently disturbing surrounding the song. It has a groovy trip-hop beat with hints of electronica and is a very vibrant performance from Kopei herself, who adds a lot to the track through her smooth singing and sensual songwriting. So, if you're ever looking for some quirky 2000s electronic music, be sure to give this track a listen. Also, a very fun fact, this same music video from Kopei was actually the first to have ever been uploaded to YouTube, with it being published on June 27th, 2005, a little over 4 months following the creation of YouTube on February 14th of that same year. Love it or hate it, there's definitely no denying that this song made history. Tunnel of Life is an altered version of the song Bougie Boy's Funeral by Devo, a new wave band from Akron, Ohio, who rose to fame during the late 70s and 80s after forming as a direct response to the shooting of war protesters on the Kent State campus in May of 1970, with founding members Mark Mothersbaugh and Gerald Casale both having been students at the university. For over half a century, Devo has proved massively influential in alternative and industrial scenes through their well-established catalog, of which largely consists of satirical social commentary, unusual instrumentation and visuals, and surreal performances from the members themselves. Tunnel of Life in particular is essentially just the outro of Bougie Boy's Funeral, but turned into its own song with cryptic lyrics as opposed to just a closing instrumental. Recorded in 1977, the track is exclusively featured in a tour film which was first intended for Devo's 1980 Freedom of Choice tour, serving as a segue for the band's live performance of the song. The film is divided into 2 halves, the first being the opening portion, which is set in a factory and introduces the character of General Boy and Bougie, both of whom being part of Devo's cinematic universe of sorts. There, Boy warns Bougie of his works and alerts him of the factory's dangers that could lead to severe injuries if Bougie doesn't tread cautiously. Sure enough though, Bougie's head is later crushed by one of Boy's machines in a grim foreshadowing. This takes the viewer into the second half of the film, which includes Tunnel of Life. Now inside of a dimly lit hospital, a nurse slowly unwraps the bandages covering Bougie's entire face to suspenseful music playing in the background. The nurse unveils Bougie's now severely disfigured head, his face incredibly wrinkled and devoid of any eyes. It's here where Bougie himself appears on stage to sing the harrowing lyrics to Tunnel of Life, wearing the same inside-out mask as seen in the tour film. Strangely, only the first half of this movie had survived to see the light of day. Though altogether filmed in 1975, the second half became a notoriously obscure piece of lost media for roughly 40 years, before later being reused for Devo's hardcore tour between 2011 and 2013. Concert goers during this time recalled having been so confused and terrified of the segue that the entire crowd turned completely silent, almost to the point where you could hear a pin drop from the very back. Due to its obscurity, the piece was unknown to any and all fans in attendance, including the absolute most hardcore of them all, making the viewing experience all the more appalling. Very intriguing stuff all around, and a testament to how moving Devo's art can really be. Composed in 1956. Yes, you're listening to 50s music right now. A Piece for Tape Recorder comes from the genius of Vladimir Ussachevsky, a composer born in modern-day China who immigrated to the US in 1930 and began a long career in teaching at New York City's Columbia University up until his retirement in 1980. Starting in the 1950s, Ussachevsky began specializing in the composition of electronic music, a significant shift in sound from his earlier works with more classical instruments and neo-romantic influences. The outlandish-sounding Piece for Tape Recorder was one of the first songs Ussachevsky composed during this transitional period, and the electronic musician had this to say about the piece in a 1960 article for the Musical Quarterly. It is tempting to parade unusual sounds, and the structural unity of a composition can be seriously weakened by diverting attention with an overabundance of such sounds. To avoid creating these distractions with Piece for Tape Recorder, I restricted my raw material to the following: non-electronic, a gong, a piano, a single stroke on the cymbal, a single note on a kettle drum, the noise of a jet plane, a few chords on an organ, and electronic. 4 pure tones produced on an oscillator, a tremolo produced by the stabilized reverberation of a switch on a tape recorder. This song is most widely known for its inclusion in the 2001 psychological horror film Session 9, of which it serves as a perfect score in all honesty. Another entry from Usachevsky, the ominous-sounding Metamorphosis, was an early electronic piece composed a year after a piece for tape recorder in 1957. It features much of the same sci-fi ambience as the aforementioned track, with unusual quirks and sounds that collaborate to establish an utterly haunting soundscape. You know, it really is astonishing to listen to music as sonically advanced and futuristic as Usachevsky's works, just for it to have been released in the 1950s, a time when modern electronic instruments such as synthesizers or samplers hadn't been invented yet. The man truly laid the groundwork for today's electronic and sci-fi music, and I've undoubtedly developed a respect for him and the work he's done during such an early time period for the genre. This is a 3-minute instrumental song released in 2021 by 000, a Dutch producer who primarily makes dark electronic and techno music. The track is part of his EP titled Motion Picture, and instantly submerges the listener in a dark ambience. Light the Fire consists of hard-hitting bass, a riveting build-up, and a soundscape that gives those listening an unapologetic energy boost. At the time of this recording, 000 is still a relatively small artist, but I must say, the sound design on his works are very much A1 for a producer his size. Produced in 2007, the sonically dark ambient piece of Shining Skull Breath comes from the genius of Jeffrey Cantu Ledesma, an American multi-instrumentalist who is largely known as the co-founder of the San Francisco-based record label REUPLOAD. Since the late 90s, Cantu Ledesma has been creating dark soundscapes and building mostly mellow musical atmospheres. But on his sophomore effort, and its title track in particular, Cantu Ledesma strays away from the breathy, soft ambience of his previous works and ventures into a sonic world of distortion, of intricate yet chaotic instrumentation, and of haunting melody. This song instantly opens with a roaring static, which remains prevalent up until the very end, while in the background, a faint harmony graces the piece while more and more sounds are layered together to form one brutal, buzzing instrumental, in the same way as adding fuel to an eternally burning flame. The track slowly begins a decrescendo around the 5-minute mark, like a fire gradually fading away, but not before unapologetically turning your speakers to ash with its disorienting droning and thunderous transmissions. But there very much is still beauty entrapped within the napalm-covered instrumental that is Shining Skull Breath. Whether it's precise performances through the electric guitar, chords that are so distorted and engulfed in the shimmers of melody that listening feels like being transported into another world, or simply the song's uproarious ambience. This piece checks out every box of a masterful composition, as it's able to evoke so much emotion and energy through deafening drones and hazy sound waves, all while being produced with so much delicacy, providing a strange tranquility inside of a sonic hell. To me, this is certainly one of the most flat-out uncanny entries up until this point of the iceberg. Direct abuse comes from American artist Jeff German under the musical alias of Hands 2. In 1988, German released a 15-track album under the Hands 2 pseudonym titled Catalog of Abuse, including many harsh and abstract noise pieces similar in sound to the 14th track Direct Abuse. Depending on the person and how squirmish they may be to certain sounds, listening to this song might as well be borderline torturous, as it is roughly 6 minutes of off-putting scratches, screeches, clicking, and other peculiar tumults that come in no particular cadence. Essentially, an ASMR session turned awfully agonizing. Some of these noises are equally as uncomfortable as the sound of a fork scraping a plate or chalk sliding on a blackboard, and given the song's unnerving nature, it wouldn't surprise me at all if silverware really was utilized to create these notoriously intolerable noises. There is a condition some of you may know about surrounding an extreme sensitivity to specific sounds known as hyperacusis, which may cause a person to cringe more than most at some of the unpleasant sounding noises that are ever so prevalent on Direct Abuse. This track honestly is quite intriguing to me. However, as someone who admittedly tends to experience symptoms of this aforementioned condition, I definitely can't help but feel a bit uneasy while listening. And on to Tier 7. Requiem is a French avant-garde and electronic album released in 1978 by French experimental composer Michael Chion. This entry is undoubtedly unique from the rest in the sense that as opposed to only referring to one singular song, it focuses more on a piece that spans a total of 10 separate tracks, each serving as individual parts to the grand and continuous composition that is Requiem. Some parts are only less than 2 minutes in length, while others are all the way up to 10 minutes, but each and every one of them feature peculiar radio play, signature experimental instrumentation from Chion, and even occasional themes and spoken words surrounding the likes of religion. Aged 77 today, Chion himself spent a significant amount of time working for the French radio and television organization in 1970 with fellow French musicologist Pierre Schaeffer, a notable figure for developing Schaefferian theories, or theories involving the audio-visual relationships in film. A majority of Chion's works, whether it be musical or literal, further elaborate on these theories and methodologies and provide more insight on the interactions between image and sound within cinematography, with Chion labeling his compositional pieces musique concrète. A book Chion authored in 1990 is widely viewed as the definitive publication on the subject, and ingenious projects similar to Chion's Requiem have put Schaeffer's theories on full display. The independent scholar now lives his days as the associate professor at the Université de Paris in France, working as a theoretician on the audio-image relationships he has studied for decades. Ordeal is a heavy-hitting death-step track released in 2019 by German artist Venom. Though only being under 2 minutes in length, the song's growling guitar backed by aggressive drums all throughout its duration makes listening feel like taking devastating blows to the eardrums over and over again. The track does not let off the gas pedal at all despite its short span, and the menacing production from Venom helps to create a sinister experience to say the least. Surprisingly, Ordeal actually marks the last musical effort from the dubstep producer since 5 years ago, as neither his SoundCloud nor his Bandcamp have been updated with new songs or projects since. In spite of this drought, however, Venom's works have cultivated a newfound following of fans eagerly awaiting his return. It's currently unknown if said return will ever happen, but I'm sure if it does, Venom will come back the same way he started, with an absolute bang. Another cryptic instrumental, I'm Okay, You're Okay, is the 12-minute closing track to Australian musical group Beta Airco's 2005 release of the same name. The album itself is mostly technical glitch, with elements of experimental hip-hop occasionally featured throughout its duration. As mentioned earlier, this outro is rather ominous in nature. An eerie drone resonates during its lengthy span while jittering vocal chops linger in the background, making for an uncannily quiet and dissonant electronic ambient piece. A vast majority of the other instrumentals on this album are equally as bizarre and uncommonly structured as this closer, and it's led many fans from both during the time of its release and in the present day to be rather divisive on general opinions. Regardless, the music's quirkiness comes together to create an odd, weirdly vague listening experience.
ค่ะดีเฮ้ยไม่ได้กระวันเส้นเลยแต่เป็นได้กระห้าตัวแต่ไม่ได้ไม่ได้แต่ไม่รู้ว่าแค่นี้ไม่ได้กันมาได้เลยไม่ได้กันI'm like a cockroach with a blood flow never to be seen or heard sitting in a hole giving you some soul spitting out the dummy.
Released on November 1st, 1999, Rust-Colored Behemoth is the 8-minute closer to Government Alpha's third full-length project, Sporadic Spectra. Alpha, whose real name is Yasutoshi Yoshida, is a veteran Japanese noise musician with a series of works that have made waves in the nation's underground scenes. Now, Sporadic Spectra is widely notable by fans for its deafening volume, with Rust-Colored Behemoth in particular being so absurdly loud and ear-piercing that according to the album's official Bandcamp page, listening to this song on just about any volume level is, quote, frankly dangerous. Apart from a few seconds of light relief at the beginning of Cryptic Cave, Sporadic Spectra is a non-stop 57-minute barrage of extremely loud noise. Even at normal listening volume, songs like Pale-Eyed Lemming sound like a jackhammer trying in vain to punch its way through a 10-foot thick iron plate, right there in your living room. Extremely harsh noise that changes enormously from track to track, and also changes within each track into several different experiences. Reminiscent of a combination of Merzbow with his rumbling, crushing noises that cycle, and KK Null's penchant for high-pitched, piercing screeches via guitar. A satisfying, punishing listen. Quality extreme noise for those who know the difference and need the real stuff. Government Alpha delivers, and this is some of the best. If you're curious enough to give the track a listen yourself, then by all means. I would include a snippet here, but I do care about my viewers' eardrums, and I don't want this video to turn into an utter noise hazard. And I really am serious when I say these things. This song is loud. You've been warned. This heavy electronic noise instrumental from Stone Cipher is undoubtedly one of the most ear-piercing songs featured up until this point. The track was released in November of 2021 as part of Stone Cipher's project titled Organs. It's self-releasing under the Bad at Raving Foundation label, or BARF for short, which consists of electronic music equally as harsh and infernal as this entry. Jans' music visuals found on YouTube accurately encapsulates the atonal chaos of the instrumental as well, full of bold colors, distorted and hypnotic visual effects, and an atmosphere that feels similar to that of an acid trip gone fully extreme. To sum it all up, probably the musical equivalent of a lobotomy. Spanning over 9 minutes in length, Eating the Universe is the intoxicating title track of the debut record from Deconstructor, a Russian sludge band who initially started out as the Moon Mistress in 2009 before later reforming to become Deconstructor in 2014. This record being released that same year, as it marked a new beginning for the outfit as they ventured deeper into styles of heavier psychedelic grunge and doom metal. The title track itself may as well be classified as more of a slow burner with relatively lo-fi mixing, but through its prolonged duration, it includes bludgeoning riffs and disorienting rumblings of the bass that establishes a dark stoner drone atmosphere. Vocally, the singing does come off as muddy, largely due to the background ambience overwhelming much of the delivery. But the song and the project it's a part of is most notable for its exceptional instrumentation, implementing captivating riffs and melodies that come off as spacey and simultaneously absorbing. Eating the Universe has an eerie acidic soundscape to it. It's a slow, low-sounding song that fills all 9 minutes with dooming guitar play and assaulting bass, even despite the drums not being as prevalent as they are in Deconstructor's future, more polished works. Still, the track provides a very grisly and morbid listening experience, and it was quite an intriguing introduction to the band to say the least. It's been said that the song speaks of pseudo-philosophical ideas and subjects through its writing, but I believe most of it is in Russian, so it's sadly indiscernible to my ears. Give it a listen if you feel like it though. What Deconstructor did on this track is definitely compelling. I'm just gonna let you know now, this song is dog shit. It is the most generic, cringe-worthy SoundCloud rap track and sonically isn't worth mentioning in the slightest. Now, what makes this song disturbing is undoubtedly the artists themselves and their horrific actions following its release. Awake the Rapper is the musical alias of Illinois native Robert Eugene Cremo III, and on the 4th of July in 2022, the 21-year-old man turned an otherwise innocent Independence Day parade into an event of infamy when he carried out a mass shooting in Highland Park, Illinois at 10:14 a.m. Firing from the rooftop of the nearby Ross Cosmetics store, Cremo took the lives of 7 parade attendees during the shooting and injured a total of 48 more before his eventual capture. It was a senseless attack which occurred just 15 minutes after the parade even began, with the victims ranging in age from 88 years old to as young as just 8 years old. Cremo fled the scene within the crowds of panicked civilians while wearing women's clothes as well as makeup which concealed his face tattoos in an attempt to mask his identity from authorities. Still though, the perpetrator was apprehended by Lake Forest police units several hours after the shooting, concluding a manhunt which involved over 100 police officers. Following Cremo's arrest, thorough investigations were conducted by the FBI among several other local police agencies in order to gather vital information on the shooter such as their background, past criminal incidents, and an ultimate motive. It was later learned that the Highland Park shooting was premeditated by Cremo several weeks in advance, this being evident through none other than his prior works as Awake the Rapper. Cremo frequently spoke of violent behavior and mental instability in his songs, and even created accompanying music videos that seem to have been portraying fictional mass shooting events, though much of this material is largely unavailable today. One of these sinister videos even included narration from Cremo himself, cryptically stating, "I just need to do it. It is my destiny." Having also been raised in a problematic household, Cremo had a violent upbringing in which he witnessed domestic abuse from both his parents and upon himself. Law enforcement had previously visited Cremo's home on roughly 20 separate occasions, with some of the most notable being in April of 2019 when Cremo had threatened to commit and in September of that same year, when a 911 call was made surrounding Cremo threatening to quote, "kill everyone," resulting in the arrival of police and 16 knives as well as a dagger and a sword being confiscated, all of which belonged to his father. Though it's clear that Cremo had always been a troubled individual, a general motive for his actions on the 4th of July has never been identified by authorities. He often took part in far-right gatherings and was found to have been active on neo-fascist forum pages where he was very vocal about his extremist ideologies. But according to Secure Community Network CEO Michael Masters, it was never made abundantly clear from his online ideating of the shooting that the attack was on one particular community. Cremo has since been charged with 21 counts of first-degree murder, 48 counts of attempted murder, and 48 counts of aggravated battery, all of which he has pleaded not guilty to. His trial is set to take place on February 25th, 2025. La mia libido, or My Libido in English, is yet another deaf noise entry, this time from the Italian noise outfit of Thanatophobia. Released in March of 2019, the track clocks in at nearly 8 minutes in length and is backed with a much longer 20-minute noise piece titled La mia ossessione as the B-side. The song is sonically hellish, including deafening industrial screeches, thunderous bass and static that feels like it's crushing the eardrums, and a deathly energy that's only enhanced as the instrumentation goes on through the power electronics being used. As for why this blood-curdling piece gets its name from one's own sex drive, I couldn't tell you. This is one insane-ass track though. Released on November 9th, 2012, 1973, is the cathartic title track to Serom's double album of the same name. Serom is a musical project which was founded in 2011 by Maurice de Jan, or better known as Maurice, a Dutch multi-instrumentalist who has masterminded several other experimental music projects over the decades, such as Gnaw Their Tongues, Adderlating, and Cloak of Altering. Described as ethereal music with aesthetics of black metal and ambience, Serom was birthed as a result of a creative burnout from Maurice, having composed rather bleak ambient and post-rock works with depressive atmospheres for a vast majority of his career. Maurice's previous projects utilized distortion and melancholic melodies to create emotionally heavy musical statements on existentialism and personal expression. And though they were often critically acclaimed, the music's sorrowful themes began to take a toll on his own mental well-being, to the point where he was in dire need of a change in tone. I started to feel burned out. I think all the negativity in my music making kind of had an impact on me. I needed to do something positive. This said positive shift eventually manifested itself as Serum, an alluringly haunting yet enthralling side project that most notably focuses on the beauty of life and melancholy. It was this empowering force that greatly contributed to the songwriting and creative process of 1973, a euphoric ambient album with hints of post-black metal, as well as occult harmonies and electric guitar play. The moving title track boldly emphasizes the album's animated themes and puts the sonic shift from dark to light on full display. Opening with glaring synths as fierce string and electric guitar instrumentation continuously clash with each other to gradually create a roaring, simultaneously noisy and angelic climatic piece. A grand cluster of melodies fills the entire song with an overwhelming emotional sensation, almost evoking a feeling of ascension into a new, enlightening state of living and expression. Faintly in the background, the renowned poem I Do Not Love Thee by famed English author and social reformer Caroline Elizabeth Sarah Norden is also recited. A poem which speaks of an undying love displayed through raw feelings and actions as opposed to contradictory thoughts. A myriad of reasons can be listed as for the poem's significance to the song, but I believe the immense exclamation of love and affection from the speaker is something that resonates deeply with the track's tone and meaning. It is a profound, unexplainable sensation of the heart and soul that even if you attempt to disregard from the outside, has an everlasting inner impact. The final entry is Sesamo Blues, a track from vaporwave artist Robustum which samples the theme song of the iconic American children's show Sesame Street and utilizes dialogue from a 1983 episode as a spoken word piece. The Sesame Street scene that was sampled is one that focuses largely on death, as the show makes a gentle attempt at introducing the concept to its younger, otherwise unfamiliar audience of children. In the clip, we see Sesame Street's own Big Bird searching for a best friend of his named Mr. Hooper so that he could give him a special gift. However, a nearby group of adults share the bad news with Big Bird and explain to him that he will be unable to give Mr. Hooper the gift because he has passed away. Big Bird seems to acknowledge this, but is ultimately in denial of the thought that he will never see Mr. Hooper again because of his death, insisting that he will still deliver him the gift when he comes back. But as one of the adults say, he never will come back, because as previously elaborated by the show, when people die, they move on from one field of life to the next while leaving behind their own bodies in the mortal world. After learning of this, Big Bird spirals into a state of confusion, wondering who would take care of Mr. Hooper's store or make milkshakes for the bird if not himself, while an eerie, slowed-down version of Sesame Street's theme song plays until the end. Now, the death of Mr. Hooper wasn't one that came out of the blue, as his actor William Lee had passed away on December 7th, 1982 as a result of a fatal heart attack at the age of 74. Mourning the loss of the beloved actor, it gradually became clear to those running Sesame Street that they would need to provide an explanation for the permanent departure of Lee's character to an audience that may not be entirely understanding of death. Despite this, as opposed to the show playing it safe and creating an innocent storyline that would have perfectly cleared up Mr. Hooper's absence without any mention of death, Sesame Street made an even better decision in the form of using the unfortunate event as an opportunity to familiarize their audience with the real tragedy and consequences of death, informing those viewing at home as sincerely as they could about the passing of Lee and his character nearly a year later on November 24th, 1983. And that's all, folks. 7 tiers, 70 disturbing songs, all with equally compelling backstories and performances sure to send chills down your spine. In all honesty, I truly had the best time making this video, as not only did I learn of the real and captivating context behind some of my favorite tracks ever, but I've gotten to discover so much new music that has continued to fascinate me more and more with time. Many of these entries weren't just disturbing or unique because of the way they sounded, but more for their deeper meanings, their detailed yet vital symbolism, and for their individual tales that provided the accompanying music with substance and gradually led to their creation. I hope you've been just as intrigued as I was when researching these pieces, and that maybe you've even found a new favorite, admittedly terrifying tune out of watching. Because I certainly have. And as disturbing as they may be, I'm not complaining one bit. This has been Zen. Take care.